Councilmember Benassini?
Here.
Councilmember Friedman?
Here.
Councilmember Bridges?
Here.
And Mayor Pro Tem Abelson.
Here.
Mayor Lyman is absent.
Thank you. With that, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag or observation of a moment of silence. And please join me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Are there any council or staff communications?
None.
I'll save it. Well, yeah. Assemblywoman Nancy Skinner had a workshop on the Affordable Care Act that I attended last Thursday, and it was excellent. There was a person there who's works for Covered California, which is the health exchange that's outreaching in our state, and it was very interesting. And there's a lot of ramifications for everyone in our country, obviously, but there's more specific things that have yet to be determined in terms of implementation. And we know already that the president backed off on some of the mandates for businesses and delayed that for a year. So it was a very interesting meeting.
Mm-hmm. Well, I just want to start out by mentioning that we had our first gourmet food truck event, and I think there were around 1,700 people that attended, if I have that number right. And I would say it was a great success. A lot of people did come, and it will be occurring. I guess it's occurring actually right now. Tomorrow's Wednesday, excuse me. And from 5 until 9, and every Wednesday thereafter until further notice. And so if you're interested, it's located on Fairmont Avenue between the streets of Carlson Boulevard and San Pablo Avenue. And everyone is welcome. And I also would like to make note of the fact that the latest city manager's report shows some awards, and I don't want to steal your thunder, would I be?
No.
Okay. We received several awards about which I personally am very excited, and I would imagine that you will be too. Thank you. The fire department was notified of, this year they have received 3 different awards for a ladder truck. We received $856,000. We received $160,000 for breathing equipment, and we received $65,000 for automated chest compression devices. That's all equipment that goes to our community to be used to save lives. And all of this is money that we are not required then to provide out of our local funding and can use for other things. So I'm just really, really excited, and I'm particularly grateful to all of the staff who were responsible for putting together the grants that made this happen, and all those who worked on it anyway. They totaled $2.1 million, so thank you. And we also received a number of awards from the 2013 Parents Press Awards through the Recreation Services for Best Arts, Best Children's Care, Best Fair or Festival for the 4th of July, the Best General and Traditional Summer Camp, Best Gymnastics Classes, the Community Center, Best Independent Preschool, Casa Cerrito Preschool, the Best Nature, Animals, and Science Summer Camp, which is Crazy Funky Science Camp, City of El Cerrito, Best Sports, Riding, and Circus, Arts Summer Camp, Best Spring Break Summer Camp, Best Swim Classes, Best Winter Camp. It's really quite an extensive list, and I'd like to thank Chris Jones, who I thought I saw. Is he here? Yeah. There he is. And all of the Recreation Department staff that were responsible for this extensive number of awards. It's pretty obvious that everyone there is doing a great job, so thank you. And with that, we will move on our agenda. But before we do, I want to mention that we just did interviews.
We have a couple staff announcements.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll go ahead and make this one. We just did interviews, and we made several appointments. We had 3 very good candidates, and we have chosen as our library commissioner for the next cycle Janice Wu, and as alternate we have chosen Tom Panis. And we're looking forward to some really good work again this year, just as we received last year. And with that, we'll move on to staff announcements.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council. I just have 2 short announcements. One is to build upon City Council Member Abelson's announcement of Off the Grid. I just wanted to give a little bit more feedback on it. Again, there were almost 1,800 people, and that was Off the Grid tells us that they expect this week to be equally as big. Their second week is often as big, and then it lessens by just a couple hundred people. So mostly that was a soft opening to kind of get out some of the kinks, or at least know which ones we needed to. And for those of you that were there, the lines were very long. And Off the Grid has told us that they're working with their food truck businesses to actually ask them to prepare more food and anticipate those crowds earlier, so there's not as much of a backup. So those that don't like lines, try to get there early. They're also going to be adding some stanchions to help control lines. But we also did not see any unanticipated issues. We've received numerous positive feedback and just a couple small issues to resolve and a couple of complaints. Overall, we're continuing to monitor just to make sure that it's going smoothly, but it seemed to go very smoothly the first time. We're going to be working with local businesses to be able to capitalize on the influx of all of those people who come. We're going to be working with Off the Grid and their customers to encourage them to come by all modes of travel, so that there's not unnecessary congestion created by the event. And finally, we also are just excited, and we've heard from the public that it's been a really interesting event, both in terms of being able to see each other. People ran into a lot of people they knew, so to build community and kind of create a sense of place, but also to look at alternate ways to use some of our public right-of-way in the same way we do with street play at Conlin and Key and along Key Route. So it's been, we feel like a very positive experience. And again, if anybody does have any concerns and want to give any both positive or negative feedback, please contact Margaret Kavanaugh Lynch or myself, Melanie Mintz, in the Community Development Department, or anybody, and it'll get to us. Another item I just wanted to provide, let's see if a quick announcement on is the Urban Greening Plan. Thanks to those who've participated thus far. So it's not going up, but it's not critical, but we can get it. We have received actually 800 responses to our survey, which was, the map I was going to show you is just how well distributed, and maybe you can see that on your own monitors, and maybe we'll get it. Here we go. This is showing about 500 dots, not 800, so for everybody who provided their nearest intersection, we mapped those responses, and one of our goals was really to get a perspective from throughout town, so you can see how well distributed north to south and east west it is. We have other info that we gathered in the surveys that I'll be providing at another time. Mostly, however, what I wanted to announce tonight is that on Tuesday, July 23rd, from 6:30 to 8:30, we'll be having our first community-wide workshop on both the Urban Greening Plan and our Active Transportation Plan, which is an update to our circulation plan for bicyclists and pedestrians that was adopted in 2007. So again, that's 6:30 to 8:30. I'll put some flyers in the lobby, and we'll be also sending out information over the next couple of days to have others help us spread the word to come to that workshop. At that workshop for the urban greening plan, we'll mostly be confirming kind of our opportunities and needs assessment that we've been conducting through the survey and other means, as well as for the active transportation plan, really confirming what the priority projects are going forward. At that meeting, we'll also talk a little bit how both the active transportation and urban greening plan overlap with the San Pablo Avenue specific plan and complete streets. So we think it's going to be a rich meeting and really hope that we get a lot of participation. I think those were my announcements for tonight.
Thank you. Are there any other staff announcements? Okay, thank you then. Let's see. The next item on the agenda is oral communications from the public on items that are not on the agenda. If you'd like to speak on an item that is on the agenda, you can do so at that time, unless it's something on the consent calendar, in which case you can speak now. And are there any items?
Yes, we have a few speakers for items that aren't on the agenda. And the first is Diane Hall.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Mayor. And my name is Diane Hall. I'm a West Contra Costa County school teacher. I'm now retired. I've been retired for a couple of years. I taught at Lake School in San Pablo and Montalban School also. So, when I retired, I was determined to devote some of my retirement time to providing art classes for the kids at Lake. I was lucky enough to be able to retire a little earlier because of the housing boom and making a nice little bit of cash. So, but I was always really wanting to equalize what I saw, the neighborhoods that I saw around Lake School compared to this beautiful neighborhood of El Cerrito that I live in. I really wanted to try to equalize that somewhat and provide those kids down at Lake with my art project, which I brought a binder of the work I've done. But I wanted to, I've been doing it for 3 years now. This will be my third year doing it for no pay, just volunteer. And it was fine to do it for, a couple of years. But after that, the saintliness of that kind of wears off. And okay. But I had an idea too, in terms of raising funds, because I'm a real laggard at trying to go out and get an actual grant. I had an idea of, I really love to bake, and I had a huge issue when I was teaching at Lake because the state health department made it illegal for us to do after-school bake sales anymore. So I was really pretty upset about that. I think some of that legislation has changed, I'm not sure. But I also wondered if it would be possible to sell my own. I love to bake. I make great banana bread. And if it would be possible to sell my own baked goods at the farmer's market, El Cerrito Farmer's Market. And I actually approached the man there, it was at least a year some time ago, and I sort of let it lie, who manages the place, and he was not very accommodating at all. He just said no. So I was just coming here to get a little more information about that and see what possibilities there might be for me to sell the baked goods, which would then go directly into my art supplies and materials for the art classes. And I think it would be fun to sell at the farmer's market, but I don't know. That's what I'm asking you about, whether that would be.
This actually isn't a question and answer thing. It's just you can comment, and then perhaps we could have a staff member. They could identify themselves, follow up with you.
Oh, that would be good.
Offline.
Okay.
Okay. So
Thank
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And one other thing I declined to mention is that there's a timer system at the front of the room in front of the dais that has a red, green, and yellow light. Green means you're within your 3-minute speaking limit. Yellow means you got half a minute left, 1 minute left. And then red means it's over. So are there any other speakers on items not on the agenda?
Yes, Ralph Boniello.
Hi, Ralph Boniello, City of El Cerrito. I just wanted to thank everybody who helped organize the food truck event on Wednesday, and I'm excited to see the ongoing event. I was optimistic that such an event would be successful, but I was shocked at how many people were there, so I'm pleasantly surprised at that. One thing that clued me into that something was amiss on Wednesday was when I was riding my bike out of the plaza, and as I was rounding the corner at Chipotle, there was a car parked right in the bike lane, and it turns out that when that section of the sidewalk was replaced, it wasn't painted red as it had been painted before. And so I'm hoping that's an issue that can get addressed in the future. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our next speaker is Tyra Wright.
Good evening, Madam Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council. I am here. My name is Tyra Wright. I'm a resident of the city of El Cerrito, and I am here this evening on behalf of the West Contra Costa Association of Realtors in conjunction with the Contra Costa Association of Realtors to invite you, the elected officials, to a reception to honor your service in the community. This is something that's done every year, generally in Contra Costa County, Walnut Creek area, and this is the first for the West County cities to be invited, and we would like to extend this invitation to you just to kind of give you an idea of how we can work together and to honor you and the service that you do for our community. And if I may, I have invitations for each of you and the city manager that I can give to the city clerk if that's permissible.
You want to just hand them to the city clerk over here? Thank you.
And we have no other speakers at this point.
Okay, it's not on the agenda. Okay, with that, then we will move on to a presentation, item number 4 on the agenda, and it's an update on 1800 Elm Street. The presentation will be by Chamberlain Associates.
Good evening. My name is Steve Chamberlain, and I represent Chamberlain Associates. The property that is the subject of the agenda this evening is a property that was acquired by my wife and I last year, and we asked to be put on the agenda so that we could come and introduce ourselves and share our vision for this remarkable property. Several years ago, Susan and I retired, and in our retirement, we decided to focus our philanthropic efforts in the area of public education for K-12 students. We further refined that because I'm not Warren Buffett to 2 school districts, the one we grew up in and where we attended public school, and the district we live in, which is this district. In the last several years, we have made a whole series of investments in the West Contra Costa district. And just a few examples of those are a program called Bring Me a Book that we did in conjunction with the East Bay Community Foundation, a program called New Leaders that we did in conjunction with several other funders and the West Contra Costa Unified School District, and most recently support for the Leadership High School, which is the top performing high school in the district and doing a remarkable job. We spent the last 10 months engaging and analyzing how best to use the facility at 1800 Elm Street. And we have now, as a result of that, have focused on doing a joint public middle and high school in the facility, operated by Summit Public Schools, one of the most outstanding public school operators in the state of California. We have a group here this evening that I would like to introduce just very briefly. Julie Wright, who is the executive director of our foundation. Julie is a former teacher and spent a number of years working for one of the most substantial education foundations in the country. Minnie Setti joined us very recently, and she is a program manager for our foundation. Doug Giffen is a project manager for
Perhaps they could stand up and we would.
Julie Wright, Doug Giffen, and Minnie Setti.
Thank you.
And then last but not least, Kelly Garcia, who joins us from Summit Public Schools and would like to share a few comments about the program and their vision for that facility. Kelly is currently the executive director and principal for Summit's Everett High School.
Thanks, Steve. Against my better judgment and my teacher knowledge, I'm going to actually hand you a packet first that I'm going to talk about and ask you to look at it after I'm done talking. It's a little hard to do. So I just wanted to take a couple moments of your time just to introduce myself to you because I'm really looking forward and hoping to become a strong member of the El Cerrito community. My name is Kelly Garcia. I'm entering my 18th year in public education. The most recent 10 years has been with Summit Public Schools, a charter organization on the peninsula. For the last 2 years, I've been the school leader, the executive director or principal for Everest Public High School. And really, the packet you have in front of you really it really spells out our model and why we really are excited to come to West County. But a couple things I just wanted to really point out about us are, number one, we really focus on college readiness. And as you look at that packet, you'll see that we have a 100% college readiness rate across all demographic groups. So we really focus strongly on preparing students for college. We also really focus on character. And so we have 6 core characteristics that are core to our organization that we relentlessly and consistently infuse into everything that we do, leading to making our students actually really strong members of whatever community we reside in. And we operate 4 current schools right now. And I would invite you at any time to come visit any of them to see what a strong community member we actually are as an organization. And lastly, our third kind of strength around college character and then community really is the last one. And we emphasize not only forming a community within our schools, but also becoming strong members of whichever community we actually are fortunate enough to reside in. So Mr. Chamberlain already mentioned this, but we definitely are a nationally recognized organization. We are incredibly excited to come to West County and serve the students who live here. And I invite you to come see our school and ask any questions that you have. I'm completely available to you guys as we go through the chartering process and are really hoping that the West Contra Costa County Unified School Board District approves us next month.
Thank you.
There are a number of people from the community who've joined this evening. We didn't have an agenda for them, but they may wish to speak. Maybe I could just ask that they raise their hands so you can see the people who are interested and wanted to speak.
Maybe they could stand up and, yeah.
So we're here to answer any questions you might have. Doug Giffen will be leading our process with your city staff in terms of going through whatever we need to go through as part of this process. But we wanted to introduce ourselves and give you some idea of where we were headed.
Okay, Mark?
Yeah. Thank you and your family and all the supporters for your efforts on behalf of young people in our community. I really appreciate that, and the commitment is very admirable. What's the timeline for opening the school?
Ideally, we'll start with 127th grade students in the fall of 2014.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll echo what Councilmember Friedman say. Thank you so much for introducing yourself. I think it's so important to come out early. There's so much interest in this property. It's a big part of our small city. It isn't often that a turnover of this many acres occurs in this city, so thank you for keeping us informed. I will just note that you probably know this, but previously the school wasn't this age group, so I'm sure you're thinking about how you'll do work with the neighbors to help them understand the types of impacts that may be a little bit different on them from the older kids that will ideally be coming to the campus.
Sure, I'd happy to speak to that just even for a moment. I think sometimes contrary to belief, I think sometimes we believe that older students are a little bit more scary than having the younger students. But interestingly, what I have found, especially I'm a parent of elementary school students actually, and when I think about the school that I currently run, two things really stand out in terms of the impact it might have on a community is that elementary school students are actually significantly louder throughout the day than my high school students. The number of recess and balls and screams and tags and all of those things that happen, sadly happen significantly less at a high school. And the other piece, I think, one of the things that we infuse into our program is mandatory community service. And so with high school students and middle school students, you actually have an age group where they can actually go out, work in your local libraries, volunteer with different community agencies, go to elementary schools, work with the elderly, et cetera. And we actually do that with all of our students because they have a required number of hours, and we facilitate that for them. So that's, I think, one of the exciting parts about bringing a little bit of an older group.
Great. Thank you.
I just want to thank you again for the presentation. I won't echo what some of the previous speakers have said, but you said you would admit about 127th graders initially. Is the definition of middle school 7 through 12? Or will it be younger students also?
No. The way the charter has applied is that we will build every year. So we'll start with 100 in the 7th grade, and then the next year add 100 for the next 7th grade, and then we'll have 100 7th and 8th grade, or 200 total. We just build up every year. So the lowest we would go is 7th grade in terms of age.
Thank you.
I guess if a family wanted to send their students to the school, what would be the process for getting in, vaguely?
These are all really great questions. I'm glad I have a chance to answer them. So as a public charter school, we are subject to lots of laws and regulations around enrollment and admittance. And so we have what's called a random public drawing, and a lottery, basically. So there are no preferences for any demographic groups, any city groups, anything. It really truly is a name in the hat, pull them out. And it's not even first come, first serve. We set an initial deadline, and everyone who has applied by that, if they exceed more than 120, then we actually move into a random public drawing phase.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? No. Thank you.
There may be other speakers who want to address the issue, so we'll just leave the podium open.
Okay. We do have a very, very full agenda tonight, so if we could be very brief.
We have two requests to speak.
Okay.
The first is Ben Steinberg.
I'll just be very, very brief. Ben Steinberg, my daughter goes to Mira Vista. I'm a parent in the community. We want to welcome the charter school into our community with open arms, and we will be sure to be good neighbors. I'll guarantee that my child won't make too much noise, but also some of those other children. So anything we can do to make it a success, I pledge my support in that regard. Thank you.
Yeah.
The next speaker is Dennis Cody.
Hi, I'm Dennis Cody. I moved to El Cerrito 10 years ago, and I have an 8 and 10-year-old also going to Mira Vista. And I guess I'm very excited about the idea of a charter school with new ideas, also giving different options for students. And for me, it was very important when I was a student to have different options, and I'd like to have the same for the community. Thanks.
Thank you. And that's it? Okay. Is that the end of your presentation? Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the adoption of the consent calendar, items number 5A through 5D.
I move adoption of the consent calendar items 5A through 5D, which includes the minutes, establishment of speed limits, application for federal funding, and Committee on Aging appointment.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition, abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. With that, we'll move on to item number 6 on the agenda, which is a public hearing on fire hazard abatement. And we will be adopting a resolution declaring weeds, rubbish, litter, or other flammable material on certain real property identified in the resolution that property constitutes a public nuisance. Is there a staff report? Thank you.
Good evening, council members. As many of you know, my name is Dave Chaparro. I am the Fire Prevention Officer for the El Cerrito Fire Department. And I'm basically here today to provide you an overview of the annual weed abatement program and introduce a resolution declaring identified properties in El Cerrito as public nuisances for the purposes of abatement. As a general overview, as many of you know, every year through the middle of May up until very early June, I do drive-by inspections of all properties in El Cerrito. From there, based on the El Cerrito Vegetation Management Standards, I begin the weed abatement process. Just as an overview, this year, initially 140 properties were found in violation as compared with 187 in 2012. And as it comes to you, the list is narrowed down to 23 properties to be declared public nuisance as opposed to the 26 from 2012. I'm available for any questions you may have.
So just to be clear, the reduction means that those other properties have already abated the nuisance, or you have a plan with them to abate the nuisance?
They have already taken care
They've already
of it.
taken care of it.
Initially, my initial inspection is 140 properties. By the drive-through I did today, we're down to 23.
Great. Thank you.
People have abated themselves.
I'll move.
If I might
go ahead.
ask a question. I'm having a little trouble following the process. I think it's because I'm having trouble manipulating paper. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. So let me just note that there is a revised Exhibit A to both resolutions that have been submitted by Battalion Chief Bond for consideration this evening. And I'm still having a little trouble here. Okay, so now we go to the public hearing, right?
Well, I believe staff is requesting that the council first adopt a resolution
okay.
declaring the nuisance.
Okay, okay. So, is there a motion?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll
you made
move the
motion.
resolution declaring that weeds, rubbish, litter, or other flammable material on certain real property constitutes a public nuisance.
I second.
Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition, abstention? Motion carries unanimously. Now we move on to part 2 of this process. And let's see. I'm still having a little trouble here.
We have no speakers.
We have
no request to speak so far
I'm a little
for the
confused
public
because it
hearing.
seems like it's a new process. Or do we not open the public hearing?
We can open it and then.
Yeah, the next step is to open the public hearing and see whether or not there are any objections.
It's on the back page.
On the back,
has the
okay.
Purple or lavender.
Okay, here we go. Okay, so at this time, we'll open the public hearing, and there are no speaker
I
slips.
have no request to speak.
I move that we close the public hearing.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposition, abstention, motion carries unanimously. Now it's time to take action on the second resolution, which is attachment 6. Is there a motion?
Sure. I move to adopt a resolution overriding objections by property owners as identified on the revised Exhibit A to the resolution, ordering the city manager or his designee to abate certain public nuisances by having the weeds, rubbish, refuse, dirt, or other fire hazard or noxious or dangerous materials removed pursuant to El Cerrito Municipal Code Charter 16.26 and Government Code 39574. Now I'll take a breath. The city manager or his designee shall keep an account of the cost of abatement for each parcel of land on which work is performed. The city manager or designee shall then prepare an itemized written report to be presented to the city council so that, after the notice and hearing during the city council meeting of September 18, 2012, these abatement costs can be confirmed as a special assessment against those parcels.
I second the motion.
Okay. Any discussion?
No.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposition, abstention, motion carries unanimously. With that, we will move on to item number 7A, which is an agreement with the Trust for Public Land for acquisition of Hillside Natural Area property, which is APN 505-142-012 and 013.
Good evening, City Council members. My name is Melanie Mintz, and I'm the city's interim Community Development Director. And I'm here tonight to recommend that City Council enter into a purchase and sale agreement with the Trust for Public Land for the purchase of a 7.6-acre property adjacent to the city's Hillside Natural Area already in public ownership, as well as to recommend that the city authorize the city manager to enter into a professional services agreement with Trust for Public Land to provide real estate transaction and professional services related to the acquisition and conveyance of the property to the city. And the Trust for Public Land would also provide fundraising assistance through grant writing and through assisting a local private fundraising campaign. The property, as shown on the screen, is located between the city's Hillside Natural Area South and Hillside Natural Area North. And as you can see, it's the property in red. It fits somewhat like a puzzle piece between land already owned by the city, both to the south, and then there's a property between our existing Hillside Natural Area property and this one, although there's a connection between the two, but there's also property owned by the East Bay Municipal Utility District, and then a property owned by the city, which then would provide an opportunity to connect to the Hillside Natural Area North. Acquisition of the property would provide, as I said, an opportunity for the city to eventually develop a trail connection between the south and north Hillside Natural Areas. This property is also accessible via an existing stairway beneath Madera Elementary School, as well as from Potrero Avenue via an existing stairway that connects Madera Circle and Julian Drive to Potrero Avenue, directly across from the Hillside Natural Area North. This gap closure, or trail link, would create an uninterrupted, approximately mile-long park right in the middle of the city. The property also has riparian habitat, and as I said, is adjacent to Madera Elementary School, providing opportunities for environmental education. Creating this connection was identified as a project in the city's circulation plan for bicyclists and pedestrians, adopted in 2007 as a part of the Park Trail Connector Project, which identified purchasing undeveloped properties bordering the Hillside Natural Area in order to enhance trail connection. And as a first implementation strategy, the plan did recommend connecting the southern and northern sections. Also, the city's general plan includes goals related to open space acquisition, including the resources goal, which is to protect natural resources, important habitat, ecological resources, key visual resources, stream banks, etc., and Parks and Rec, which is to that high-quality open space protected for the benefit of present and future generations, reflecting a variety of important values: ecological, educational, aesthetic, economic, and recreational. The general plan states that these values are interwoven throughout the community in numerous ways, so that the preservation of open space is very important to the well-being of the city. This item is coming to you at this time due to a confluence of a number of factors. Residents and representative from both Friends of Five Creeks and the Trail Trekkers, two local nonprofit, non-governmental organizations, brought to the city's attention that the property was about to be listed for sale several months ago. Knowing that the city itself didn't have a lot of expertise in land conservation or a lot of bandwidth, as we call it, in terms of staff time, we called the Trust for Public Land, a national conservation organization located in San Francisco, or based in San Francisco, which is dedicated to working with public agencies such as local municipalities to preserve open space land for conservation and recreation purposes. Trust for Public Land visited the property with us, evaluated it, and thought that it provided a unique opportunity, critical to their mission, and a unique opportunity to the city of El Cerrito. Other factors include the availability, if you approve so tonight, of city funds to help leverage grant funds to make this acquisition possible, and importantly, a strong community group, again, to lead a private fundraising and ongoing stewardship campaign. The two main groups are the Trail Trekkers and Friends of Five Creeks, both who've put numerous hours into trail building, and Friends of Five Creeks in particular recently has put over 1,000 hours into helping with fire prevention efforts up at the Hillside Natural Area through removal of invasive plants such as French broom. At the March 5th special City Council meeting, City Council authorized staff to work with the Trust for Public Land to negotiate and see if purchasing this property would be an option, if we could secure a price as we deliberated, as City Council deliberated, about whether this would be, what the funding was and whether this would be desirable. A Trust for Public Land commenced those negotiations and learned that the landowner, the current landowner, required and was intending to sell the property this year by the close of this calendar year. With that time sensitivity, Trust for Public Land, in communication with staff, worked to negotiate a lower selling price, knowing that there was the time sensitivity and that the city would not have time to do extensive fundraising. At the May 21st City Council closed session, which was conducted due to the confidential nature of real estate negotiations, City Council authorized staff to negotiate with Trust for Public Land based on what we had learned so far through communicating with the seller and his broker to develop a process through which the property could be purchased. Trust for Public Land, and what we're here tonight to seek approval of, has developed a process in which they would purchase the property. They've entered into contract to be able to have this option. They would purchase it and they would hold it until December of 2014, enabling the city to have 17 months to do fundraising for the property. What Trust for Public Land requires from us in order to do this would be that we guarantee that at the end of the 17-month period that we do purchase for the purchase price of $475,000. Additionally, the Trust for Public Land would be putting up both the money as well as all the closing costs to purchase the property by the end of August, so in next month, as negotiated with the landowner. After City Council enters and after if City Council determines tonight to move forward, the Trust for Public Land would purchase the property. It would close in August, and we would then, with the Trust for Public Land and the private fundraising campaign, enter into an active fundraising period to be able to raise as many non-city funds as possible for this purchase. And as you can see, the Trust for Public Land in the staff report and in the associated table has both recognizing the limitation for cities to be able to purchase a property without outside leveraged funds, as well as to demonstrate their confidence, has put their whole fee at risk if a minimum amount of matching funds aren't raised. So the maximum output of the city, if in the end of 17 months we weren't able to raise any additional funds, which seems unlikely, would be $475,000. With any other additional funds raised, either through the private fundraising campaign or the grant, the submittal of grants, which Trust for Public Land will help lead the submission of those grants with city staff assistance and on behalf of the city, any amount of fundraising achieved would lessen the amount that the city would have to be paying outright for this acquisition. I think, I could, I think I should address questions, or I could go a little bit more into that professional services arrangement. Again, we've identified at least three grants that we think are competitive for this project. They're an urban streams program, a recreational trails program, and an environmental enhancement and mitigation program. All of those requests for proposals don't come until after January, and so we wouldn't know that for several months. So it would be an active fundraising period. I think we did go to Parks and Recreation Commission and to seek a recommendation to council that they allow the commitment of Measure WW funds up to, but hopefully less than, the purchase price of $475,000. And we also went to the Environmental Quality Committee to seek public input. And as you can see, there's people here tonight, so I don't who will be providing their thoughts on this. I think that is essentially my staff report.
Okay, are there any council questions before we move on to public comment?
I just have two quick questions. Thank you for the report. For the grants that you anticipate applying for, do all of them have matching fund requirements?
They all have matching fund requirements. That none of them, I don't believe, have a. Well, they're more competitive with matching funds. None of them have a minimum. They're not federal funds, which normally require 11.7%.
Right.
This one isn't by formula. These, I don't believe, are by formula.
Okay. So
actually, one of them, there might be a small amount by formula.
Okay. And just to be clear, the purchase and sale agreement has the maximum purchase price of $475,000 contingent on an appraisal, which supports that finding. If the appraisal came in lower, then we would have another discussion. Yes, and I forgot, before public comment, we also have Trust for Public Land here to also speak, and we're awaiting the appraisal now. But yes, if the appraisal, we would be assuring that the property is coming in at or below market value. And the funds that the city would put forward in the worst case scenario, were nothing to be raised, would be $475,000 for the purchase price, but TPL would still be responsible for paying for the appraiser and paying for the closing costs.
All of those costs, Trust for Public Land is assuming. And it's embedded in their professional services agreement if in the end, in December 2017, but the city wouldn't be putting forward any money until December of 2014.
Thank you.
December 17th, 2014.
So I have a question. So the three grants that were already identified, those were both from our staff and from the recommendations of TPL, because I know that they do have some excellent grant writers on their staff.
Yes.
But we're working in collaboration, it'll be a dual process that we're working together for this.
As a part of the due diligence and even putting forward their proposal, the Trust for Public Land did some evaluation of existing and upcoming grants. So they actually prepared one-page memo for me to review to make sure that it was, and to tell us kind of the strengths of our project and how they met these grants. So the Trust for Public Land's philanthropic team is actively monitoring grants and actively sees it as a project of their own to be able to help the city raise the funds to purchase this property.
So although already three have been identified, potentially there could be more, perhaps. I mean, meeting the time deadline that we're interested in may not work. But what do you see as a potential accrual from the combination of the grants or singularity? Do you have any guesswork as to what we might?
A couple points. So I think we feel at a minimum $250,000 is likely. It's hard to say, right? Because you never know how many other projects are going to go in at the same time. However, what I would like to state is that we will be submitting those grants looking for more than the acquisition price. We'd be looking also for funding to help do initial trail studies and development or interpretive signage. So some of those, like the recreational trails program, would like to see, all of them see acquisition as a high priority, but they also like to see and could help support some of the trail development. So minimum 250, maximum $1 million.
Okay, it's an answer. Thank you.
Yeah, and I should point out that those grants will also look very, there's a lot of selling points for this property. It's unique to be able to have 8 acres at a price, 7.6 acres at a price that, at the price that's been secured. Also, agencies such as those that would be funding would be looking for, city council support, the public support, and the private stewardship groups and their fundraising are key points. Agencies know that the more of that you have, the more successful the long-term outlook is for maintenance and stewardship of the property, as well as community support. So I think all of those things, some amount, and when we look at what amount we would need to put into leverage, that's on a case-by-case basis when the grant guidelines come out. But just making sure that the other public agencies' funds as well as ours are really maximizing the goals of all four agencies, meaning the city as well as the agencies we'd be applying to.
Thank you.
Just a quick follow-up on that same question. Thank you. So that sounds then like for the grant application, we need to submit some sort of design for signs, or you don't? I guess I wanted to ask that question if that seems like another sort of process is how to design trails or how to design signage, or do you just envision for the grant application saying, we want trails across the site and we want some signage and not being more descriptive in terms of where they go or what they look like?
I think a combination. We could develop some very, very visual concepts, and we have some resources. The trail trackers have been actively mapping trails and trail connections. We wouldn't do very much design. I think Trust for Public Land does have trail designers, and so we would be able to at least describe in an application well enough, describe the projects well enough in the projects we anticipated that they could get a feel for what was possible, but that we would not be, Trust for Public Land ourselves wouldn't be doing any real design work. We'd be looking for funding to help with and similarly, those programs are apt to look at, for example, funding preliminary design and environmental analysis work to help ready us for future grants to be able to go for more detailed design and construction. So that's typically the way it works. You can get grants. So the acquisition, all of these programs have acquisition as a key priority. They know you need to have the land in order to be able to do anything with it. And then probably some preliminary design work and environmental analysis would be something we would also be at least seeking.
Okay, thank you.
And I think you brought up that there is actually a stream on the property, and so probably the urban streams would be one of the things we go after.
And again, what's interesting about that we think is both the accessibility of the property through the trail as well as the ability to provide environmental education adjacent to a school. And it is one of the contributing headwaters to the Baxter Creek watershed, which is also an important watershed in the area.
Okay. Do you have other presenters on this item? I thought I heard you refer to
Trust for Public Land, just to quickly introduce themselves as an organization and their involvement and assessment of the project.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Madam Mayor, members of the council, and it's our pleasure to be here, and we're really excited to be working with the city on the Madera property. My name's David Sutton. I'm the Northern California Director for the Trust for Public Land. We're a nonprofit land conservation organization headquartered in San Francisco. We have offices around the country, and we're just over 40 years old. We've protected over 3 million acres from community gardens to working farms and ranches to wilderness areas in our national parks. One of our main focus areas is our Parks for People initiative, and that involves creating parks, gardens, and natural areas within walking distance for all Americans in our cities and metropolitan areas. We're really excited about this. I mean, you look at how it connects the existing open space in the hillside natural areas. It's pretty remarkable, and both from the open space opportunity, from the trail connection opportunity, in creating access and enhancing the access that you've already created in El Cerrito. While most of our projects tend to be larger in size, this is one that accomplishes so much that it's easy for us to be excited about it. I think it probably also helps that my colleague Brendan Moriarty and I both live in the East Bay. It didn't hurt that a good friend of mine, Jeremiah Holland, also called me up and said, hey, would you work on this? Jeremiah is a teacher at El Cerrito High School and was the coach, of course, of the El Cerrito mountain bike team for many years, and is the father of my son's best friend. you know, we've been doing this, and oh, by the way, I've 22 years at Trust for Public Land, and I've done a lot of conservation projects. And most of these opportunities, there's a moment in time, and when it's there, you have to take advantage of it. And this really feels like one of those special opportunities where everything's coming together. You know, when that, probably not the best analogy, but when that bird's in hand, you want to hang on to it. And we feel that this is that moment. Before introducing Brendan to speak a bit about the negotiations and process with the landowner, I do want to just speak briefly to the grant funds. We understand that there are competing needs, and that's a sensitive and important issue. We're very confident in the ability to secure grant funds for this project. We wouldn't be proposing to buy and hold the property or to waive the fee that we absolutely need to cover our costs and to work on the project if we didn't have that level of confidence. It's not something we can afford to do. We have a very good track record. In fact, we wrote the legislation, passed the legislation for one of the 3 most promising grant funds that we're targeting. We expect to submit grants of at least $250,000 for each of the 3 grant funds that are listed in the agenda. And I think the other thing two things to mention. It's a 2-step process. So if initially the grants are well received, then the grant staff do a site tour. So there doesn't so much have to be a formal trail plan. I mean, if you get out there and walk out there, you can see how it's going to work and how it's going to fit together. So we look forward to that opportunity. I don't say this lightly. I really think we have the best grants team in the state. They're really, really good at what they do. And your staff is really good. So we look forward to working together to minimize the amount of funds that ultimately the city would have to put into this. At the same time, it's having that leverage and having the city step out in front is critical to motivate to competing for those grant funds. And of course, we can't move forward with this in the first place unless we know we've got that fallback. With that said, I want to introduce our Bay Area Program Manager, Brendan Moriarty, who will speak to our work with the landowner. And then we're both available for questions, of course.
Thanks, Dave, and thank you, Council, for having us here tonight. I just wanted to speak briefly on the timing and the process with the landowner. Our usual process with negotiating for the acquisition of conservation lands is to secure an option agreement, typically for 1.5 years. Could be more than that, to create a window within which to do the fundraising and then complete the fundraising before we would actually close on the acquisition of the property. And in this case, as in all cases, you don't really get to control the timing of these real estate deals. And in this case, the landowner had a genuine need for urgency that was driven by tax planning issues. And we've done and we continue to do a lot of real estate transactions and gotten quite good, of course, at sort of seeing through to the truth and when that's really the case in our negotiations. And we believe genuinely this is the case with the landowner. He invested a significant amount of money years ago in trying to develop the property. Ultimately, that attempt was unsuccessful. And so in the process, he had incurred a great deal of costs in addition to the cost of acquiring that land many years ago. And when he sells the property at the price we've negotiated, he will realize a substantial capital loss. That's available to provide an offset to capital gains taxes that he has realized as of this March when he sold a substantial substantial development property in Martinez, and we've confirmed that happened. So with the landowner's need for urgency, we took advantage of his need to have this happen to negotiate on price, and we thought we got quite a good price. And like Melanie said earlier, we have an appraisal in process now. We'll provide that to the city as soon as we have it in another week or two. That is about it. We're here to answer questions about the process or anything else about the project. But thank you very much for having us, and we're, like Dave said, just extraordinarily excited about the project and are loving working with your staff and also the community. It's a great opportunity.
Okay, thank you. And that concludes the presentation. Okay, thank you. Are there any council questions?
I have no more.
Okay, and are there public speakers?
We have 10 public speakers.
Public speakers? Okay, that's quite a few. So if you agree with somebody who's already spoken, you can, when you get up, just say, I agree with whoever, or I want this project, or I don't want it. However you want to express that, and we'll take that with as much weight as we would take the comments if you had already said them, since the other person already did. So with that, shall we go ahead and get started?
Dave Weinstein.
Hi, I'm Dave Weinstein, the president of El Cerrito Trail Trekkers. I would like to thank TPL. They've done a really good job. I want to thank staff. I want to thank council for being nimble enough to consider a project that comes in at the last minute. I know it's kind of stepped on the foot of a planning process, but I think back to one time I stood here about 10, 12 years ago, the Cerrito Theater. We had a city council that did not think at the beginning of the year, our goal this year is to buy a movie house, and yet they did, and look what happened. And I really think this project has the potential to really open up that whole hillside, tie into all the trails we have in town, and really increase the use of those trails. Oh, and meanwhile, while I'm talking, I'd like to ask, if you don't mind, everybody who really is in favor of this project to stand up, even if you don't want to talk during this meeting. The other people that I really want to thank is the El Cerrito High School mountain biking team. They played as big a role as anybody in getting this going. We would not be here in this room if it wasn't for their initiative. And to see those kids out there working on the Motorcycle Hill Trail, that was great. That ties directly into this trail. There are 2 creeks on the property. It's a really beautiful property. Well, that's all I have to say. I really urge you to approve this. This is a really once-in-a-generation opportunity to tie together this park, which should have been united as a park generations ago. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing, and it's going to really change El Cerrito. Thank you very much.
Michael Mija.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, the council, and staff. My name is Michael Mejia. I'm the president of the Bicycle Trails Council of the East Bay. I represent 2,000 mountain bikers in the Contra Costa and Alameda counties. I'm also one of the founders of the El Cerrito High School mountain biking team. This is a fortuitous opportunity. As an advocate for mountain biking and mountain biking access, you just don't see this happen very often. And so I feel a little foolish saying this is something we ought to do. It seems to be a slam dunk decision to me. I also want to offer our resources, the Bicycle Trails Council of the East Bay. One of the major features we have is in trail building. Now, there are trail builders and there are trail builders, but this is what we do. This year we have over 700 trail working hours in Joaquin Miller Park, which is run by the City of Oakland. And there's a fair amount of support with our organization for this. We want to wish you good luck with this. This is a wonderful opportunity. Thank you.
Seth Kaplan.
Good evening, council members. I'm Seth Kaplan. I live in El Cerrito, and I'm on the Parks and Rec Commission. I'll try to keep this short. We did, in the Parks and Rec Commission, have a pretty good discussion of this issue, and unlike any issue we've ever had, we were divided. I was one of the people speaking in favor of it, and I was hesitant, in part because this issue was brought up to us so abruptly. We didn't really have much time to consider it. The other concern that I think most of us have is just the competing needs we have in El Cerrito and everywhere, for that matter, for limited resources, limited funds. But given that, I still think that this project is worthwhile. I think it's a rare opportunity. I walked the property last Friday, and that pretty much removed any doubt that I had whatsoever of this. So I request that you vote in favor or pass this. Thank you.
Gary Hill.
Hello, nice to be here. My name is Gary Hill. I live just above the Hillside area, 1150 King. I am currently presiding on the Parks and Rec Commission, and was on the design review board for about 10 years here in the city. I'm the team director for the El Cerrito High School mountain bike team, and As Dave mentioned, we've formed a nice collaboration with the El Cerrito Trail Trekkers to promote the hillside and the trails that are existing there, and hopefully develop a new interlinking trail system. This property is a critical link between the southern and northern hillside area. It's possible to loop through with acquisition of this property, it's possible to loop through the hillside with potentially about a 4.5-mile loop trail if we were to develop it at some point. And besides just preserving open space, the density needs of the city are going to increase, and so the demand on open space is going to be at a premium. And we're in a unique situation here in the where we live because of the BART system. We're in a metropolis, even though we're a suburban neighborhood, and to have something right in our backyard to be able to, this resource, which is underutilized currently, is something that we should look at as affecting generations to come. And I think this decision that you're going to make today will have that impact, and people will look back on this as significant land purchase in terms of what it means for El Cerrito. I'm also chairing the fundraising committee, private fundraising committee, along with Dave. We've got 12 members so far, and we're having to turn people away. We've got a lot of people who said they do a lot of work, but don't want to be committed to meetings and such. Privately, in a sort of a quiet phase, we've been able to raise $13,000 from 27 people. There's mountain bikers, hikers, teenagers, retirees, adults, citizens on the committee. And I think that our efforts are going to be tireless. We are dedicated to making this happen. It's an important purchase, and so I want to thank you. And
Ann Oganowski.
Ann Oganowski, El Cerrito. I'm representing the Friends of Five Creeks, one of the people, and we definitely support this. I think the reasons were outlined very well in the presentation by the Community Development Department and the Trust for Public Land. And we've already put a lot of, as you've heard, over 1,000 work hours into the hillside natural areas, and we'll continue to do this work on the area that's in question to be acquired. Thank you.
Ralph Boniello.
Hi, Ralph Boniello, City of El Cerrito, and a board member of Friends of Five Creeks. And I just wanted to speak briefly in support of this. I had the opportunity to tour the property recently, and what I saw there was a beautiful stretch of creek. I saw rare plants. I saw native plants. I saw native communities that could be expanded with proper vegetation management. We saw wildlife out there. I think this is an important wildlife linkage corridor between the different parts of the hillside natural area. And I was really shocked at how good the views were on that piece of property. I've hiked a significant amount in the southern section of hillside natural area. I've only been over to the north side once, mainly because there's no linkage between the two. And I hear there's great views over there, but it was a foggy day when I was over there. So someday I'll get over there. But I think, from my experience, this piece of property would provide an important linkage for recreational opportunities in our community. I'm also someone who does outreach to schools, elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools, and I can tell you from experience, having an open space like this adjacent to the school where the kids don't need some form of transportation to get there is a really important thing. It opens up a lot of opportunities to them. It allows them to take field trips without having to dedicate a half day or a whole day to getting out and seeing nature. And as an organization, I envision we can provide lots of outreach opportunities on conservation and ecology to those students. So I'm really excited about this opportunity. I'm thankful that we have Trust for Public Land working with us, because it allows all of us as community groups to focus on our missions and not focus on, real estate. So it allows us to progress our missions, whether they be creek conservation or mountain biking or hiking. And I hope this gets accomplished. Thank you.
Tom Panis.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Abelson, City Council, and members of City staff. My name is Tom Panis, and I live at 7345 Fairmount in El Cerrito. Those of you who have long memories, both on the council and on the staff, will remember that shortly after Measure WW passed in November 2008, I was immediately before the Parks and Rec Commission and then the council with slides and lists of parcels that I thought the council should consider purchasing with Measure WW money. I returned the following year, and I believe 1 year after that, with pretty much the same thought: what better use could there be for our Measure WW dollars than for land acquisition? It would be a great understatement to say that I've been pleased to follow these recent developments. I'd like to thank the Friends of Five Creek and the El Cerrito Trail Trekkers for bringing this opportunity to the attention of the staff, and I'd like to thank the staff of the Trust for Public Land for following up so promptly and effectively on this. Before you tonight's the question of whether the proposed purchase of parcels 505, 142, 12, 13, and 14 for up to $475,000 is a good use for our Measure WW money. My opinion hasn't changed. I think it would be a great use, absent any grants, for that money. Thanks so much for your time.
Howdy Goody. Or Gowdy.
Hi, so I'm Howdy Gowdy. I'm on the Environmental Quality Committee and live at 635 Elm. And I, too, share the enthusiasm of everyone who's spoken for this property. It is a spectacular opportunity, and I think I fully support the idea of this being a public open space and the trails, connectivity, and natural preservation that it offers us. But at the same time, I feel obligated to provide a little constructive criticism or just a critique of what it looks like or feels like from my perspective. I may not be very well informed, but I think clearly it's partly the nature of these real estate transactions that they're a little bit more of a closed process. But it just, to me, did not feel like it held up to the standards that the city has for open, transparent process that has good is well founded in sort of strategic prioritization. I'm not challenging the fact that it's been identified this is a valuable thing to do, just that there are so many competing interests that we need to consider, and the speed with which something like this goes from a possibility to an action is a little bit hard to reconcile with other actions that the city takes. So I just want to reflect on that. I encourage us to reflect on that. I still support the action. I think it's useful, but clearly the city needs to do more of this and think about how it does it and can do it in the most equitable and representative way. So that's basically my comment. I mean, I think it's a situation where the price actually does sound amazing for a parcel of that size, but on the other hand, it's unclear to me whether further considerations could have been made to actually achieve a similar situation that was maybe even less expensive, just by the virtue of so much of it not really being developable because of the creeks and hillsides. Maybe an easement on 95% of the property could have been purchased for less money and enabled other things to happen. I am heartened by the idea that there's going to be all this grant seeking and private fundraising. That's excellent, and that will help save some of that Measure WW money for other purposes. But those are still resources that are being expended and not able to help support other things. So I just want to help bring to attention the prioritization issues and the idea that even a great opportunity like this, the process matters. You know, the ends don't justify the means. We really need to be careful about how it's structured and how we go about it. So thank you very much.
Betty Bouguinas.
Hi, I'm a longtime resident of El Cerrito and also soon-to-be teacher at Madera, and I'm very excited about this as a fairly close neighbor, as well as the thinking about the possibilities that it will provide to the school. Has been hinted at, the hillside nature area is just one of the greatest assets that the city has. It is underutilized, and it feels like this particular piece of property could really be a catalyst for us taking advantage of what we have here. As has been mentioned, it's a connector to the two big pieces. We have community groups like the Trekkers and the Friends of Five Creeks ready to help make sure we utilize this well and get the word out about it. And I'm especially, of course, concerned about the school and the possibility to take classes out there for science lessons. I do that kind of thing now at Tilden, and also to take the kids out for service projects where they can help do projects out there and get involved in that way. And of course, there's a big movement in recent years to get kids to go back to walking to and from school. So this is another way they can utilize it. And it's not just the students that are there now. The families get involved too and become aware of what's there and help. And of course, we get new students and families every year, so this will be an asset for many years to come. Thank you.
Phil Martine.
Hi, good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Abelson and members of the council. This is a great project, and I just want to really commend the council and staff, Melanie Mids, and also the Trust for Public Lands for putting this great proposal and project together. I think a lot of people have spoken before me about many of the benefits of this project. I just want to briefly say that I've been a high school mountain bike coach for the past, or parent or ride volunteer for the past 8 years, and during that time, I've witnessed firsthand the benefits to young members of our community engaging in that sport, and there are many benefits, physical, certainly, but also just getting kids out into the community is a big part of what mountain biking is about, and having them out and enjoying our trails and our parks is really a great thing about mountain biking, and I think this project has the potential not only to benefit our hikers and our young elementary school students transporting themselves to school, but also to engage our high school kids in really embracing our park system. So I really encourage you to approve this project. And I guess the last thing I wanted to say is that a lot of the kids who are involved in mountain biking have also been doing a lot of trails work, and so I think there's potential to engage young people in doing trails work as well as enjoying the trail system. So thank you very much.
Susanna Marshland.
Thank you for having us, and I also am representing the El Cerrito High School mountain biking team. I've been the secretary of that team for a number of years, and we go to great efforts to make sure that any rider who wants to ride has access to a bike and great coaching. You've heard from a couple of our coaches already, but one of the things that we have lacked is access to really good trails right here in our backyard that we don't have to drive to. And so I am very much in support of this proposal because it's so important for kids to be able to access the outdoors, to enjoy, and also to have the opportunity to give back to their community. Quite a number of these kids have been involved in trail building, as Phil mentioned, and we'd love to see that continue. Thank
you. Zen Marshland, I apologize if I botched your name.
No problem. My name is Alexander, or Zan for short. I am one of the former riders in the El Cerrito High School mountain bike team. I joined as a freshman. I'd done some mountain biking before, but due to the really, really good coaching and being able to ride good trails, I am now somebody who identifies as a mountain biker, and I can promise you that in 40 years I will still be riding bikes. Mountain biking really improved my life and made me a lot healthier, thinking about my own health, a lot more active, and helps me get outdoors more. And I've seen it happen for a ton of other kids at El Cerrito High and a ton of other kids in the league. I got good at mountain biking because our team every Sunday would usually drive to Marin, to China Camp Park, or Tamarancho, because that's where the good legal single track trails are, trails that are usually 2 to 3 feet wide and usually help teach new riders how to ride their bikes with better control. And mountain biking really should be a green sport and a sport where we both get out in the environment and care about it. And I think the best way to do that is to ride locally, be able to ride our local stash of single track and share it with others who come by. And for the benefit of everybody who's a mountain biker here in El Cerrito, it would be good, and for the benefit of anybody who could become a mountain biker and could become healthier and could be outdoors more, it would be a good idea. So thank you.
Robin Mitchell.
My name is Robin Mitchell. I'm an El Cerrito resident. I'm also on the Park and Recreation Commission. And I was one of the 2 commissioners that voted against recommending this project. And one of the reasons that I did was that partly, as Seth said, we were sort of caught off guard. We didn't know very much about we didn't know anything about the project, and just had one meeting to think about it and make a recommendation, and it was too much information without enough time to consider it. And my main concern was just that potentially so much of Measure WW money could be spent on this project. There's only like $587,000 left in Measure WW. The worst case scenario would be that we would spend $475 of that. So there wouldn't be that much left for other projects. And I am very hopeful that Trust for Public Land can do their great fundraising that they are known for doing and make it so that not that much money of Measure WW is spent, but there is no guarantee, and the city is responsible for spending $475,000 of Measure WW if none of the other fundraising comes to be. And I guess the main reason that I worry about not having Measure WW money, I mean, Melanie is convinced that we can get all kinds of other fundraising, and we are and other grants and stuff for other projects, and the city is very good at doing that. But I just think that there are a lot of underrepresented people in this town that need good urban green space and will never make it up to the Hillside Natural Area. And there aren't any parks that they can walk to. And they will never come to a meeting like this and in a public forum say what their needs are. You'll never know what they are. And so I think you need to really think hard about how you serve all the citizens in terms of urban greening and not just some of the citizens. And, you know, I'm astounded that I hear myself not supporting open space because I think it's a really important thing. But there are a lot of other priorities, other things that have equal priority, I think, in terms of park space that we need to provide for people, especially in the flats and in some of the areas where there's apartments and stuff like that. So because everyone else that spoke basically spoke for it, I felt that I had to say how I felt about it. And So I guess that's all I have to say. So.
Brian Seegers.
Hi. Yep, my name's Brian, and I also have been a rider on the mountain biking team for the last 4 years. And I just wanted to speak briefly as to some of the merits of the program. So I've lived in El Cerrito for a long time. Now I live in Kensington, but I went through Harding, Portola, El Cerrito, participated in many city programs, and I have to say that the mountain biking team has been by far the best program that I've ever participated in. So clearly there are strong benefits athletically and in developing the health of our youth, but I think some of the things that go less mentioned are the development of a team mentality. So mountain biking is really, really good at developing a team mentality because you're all there riding together, but it's different from other team sports because there's also an individual component where you can push yourself to your absolute hardest, but you're also there with your team, you support each other at the races, and I think that's important to many youth. It does very, very directly encourage youth engagement. I'll give myself as an example. So biking with this team really encouraged me to pursue the development of outdoor spaces. So I worked with Friends of Five Creeks in Berkeley, and I did an Eagle Scout project. We did about 200 hours of volunteer work, developing a hiking trail on Albany Hill. So I give that as an example of my own engagement that was taken out of this mountain biking program. And I think the speaker before me made it sound as if the park wouldn't serve everyone, but I think the mountain biking team at El Cerrito High School in particular is excellent at engaging everyone because they have programs for people who can't afford bicycles. They have team bikes for people who can't afford to participate in races. They have scholarships for that. So they really do make sure that this is a program to engage everyone in the community who is willing to step forward. And I think that's incredibly important, and this space is really, really critical to developing that program. Thanks.
The last speaker slip I have is Judy Forrest.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council, and staff. I'd like to say that I agree with the people who have supported this proposal, and I'd also like to address a couple of the objections that were made to the proposal in addition. One objection was made that the proposal came up very recently without much time to consider it. I think that one of the benefits of a community such as El Cerrito, small council, face-to-face meetings, is that we can react with nimbleness to something like this when it comes up at the last minute and see a fantastic opportunity and make a decision. I also think that this is a fairly low-risk proposition because I believe that we do have very strong chance of getting most of the project paid for through grants. I would also like to respectfully say to the person who talked about other underserved communities who may also need open spaces and may not be able to benefit so easily from this one, that not all open spaces are equal. This particular open space appears to be a beautiful location. I'm familiar with that view because my daughter went to Madera. I was a renter for many years in El Cerrito. We live in Albany now, but we own income property in El Cerrito. So I think acquiring this kind of open space enhances the value of property all over El Cerrito. And I would like to also suggest to the people who support this project that part of the grant money actually be spent on outreach to some of those underserved members of the community who might not know that the property is acquired or is there, and that this be something that we make sure is owned by the whole community and not just those people who might find it very easy to get to, and that we could make that as one of our goals as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I believe that completes our public speakers.
Yes.
So we'll now turn it back to the council for comments.
I have just a couple of follow-up questions,
Okay,
maybe that were brought
ahead.
up by a couple of the folks. Thank you so much for staying and giving your testimony, and I appreciate the Parks and Rec commissioners coming. We don't always hear exactly what happens at meetings because our liaison report is usually at the end of the meeting, so I appreciate you coming tonight to talk about what your commission did and what your deliberations were like. Just a question for Melanie or maybe for TPL, and that is, was an easement an option, or was that not desired by the owner due to the tax advantage they were looking for.
The owner of the property is a gentleman in his 80s, and he's been a developer for the majority of his career, and at this point in time is getting out of the development business, and his son is taking over, and he recognized that he wasn't going to have the time to take another attempt at developing the property, and wanted to just resolve it and get rid of the property in full. And I should mention that in regards to the timing, the reason that we're confronted with the need to purchase the property in August rather than at the end of the year is because in the event that the Trust for Public Land didn't perform on the contract for purchasing the property, the landowner needed time to react and find another buyer for the property in order to take advantage of those tax planning issues that I mentioned earlier.
Add something specifically with easements in addition to what Brendan just shared. Our best assessment of this, and Brendan, you can respond to whether you offered that, but often easements are more successful when somebody is wanting to keep a portion of their land for some purpose. So a farmer, for example, might be very, very apt to do that, or somebody who has a connection to this property. And again, as Brendan noted, the owner of the land was in it for real estate development, and the financial benefits of selling it fee simple would be greater. So, Brendan, you can talk about whether you specifically talked about it, but it doesn't. It's often an excellent way, and I've used it in other places, but it didn't seem to come up in these conversations with each fact that we learned. So.
Okay, and the only other question I had is with regard to some of the item that the Parks and Rec Commissioners brought up. I know that we've had these Measure WW funds, and I was the liaison to the Commission more than a year ago now, and there were some projects discussed, but there really wasn't a prioritization discussed for Measure WW funds, and I'm wondering if there were specific projects on the list, and I think Jerry Bradshaw at that time when I was the liaison was providing sort of staffing assistance to the Commission on this particular item. Are there particular projects that are in the near future that we're giving up, or are the other potential projects really items that are near long-term type of things that we might not be able to act on immediately, that maybe we can act on after the urban greening plan or after there's additional monies? I guess I just want to hear a little bit more about what the trade-offs are.
Again, Jerry or the Recreation Director, Chris Jones, can chime in if I miss some of this. So originally, Measure WW had almost 1.1 million, so 1,065,000 available. The funds that have been spent so far have been on a Creekside lighting project. It was 104,000. Cerrito Vista Playground was 186,000, and Gilman Field, we made a contribution of almost 14,000. There's also currently $174,000 dedicated to Huber Park improvements, long-awaited Huber Park improvements, which you may have heard about. And so that leaves what one of the speakers referred to, or one of the Parks and Rec Commissioners referred to as $587,000 remaining. So this does not. So that's one part. There's also been there was a survey conducted early on that staff and the Commission and others have realized was a snapshot, but that it didn't necessarily have enough information to make all the decisions. It's kind of small here, but open space acquisition at that time was the top ranking project, followed by Cerrito Vista Park ball field, Creekside Park lighting, Cerrito Vista Playground, and Central Park Playground rehabilitation. So it goes down. So the top ones were easy, and I think that the Parks and Recreation Commission and our Public Works Director and others and Recreation Director realized the rest, it started to get harder. And at the same time, we did seek funding for the urban greening plan and realized that the outreach and input that came through that could help the process. It wouldn't determine, and it wouldn't be making decisions on every dollar spent, but it could help get a broader sense, including of what type of land acquisition needs there were. At the time, you might recall that when open space acquisition came up, Council did direct staff to continue to kind of evaluate and look at the viability of it. Could we do it? Was there outside funds? So speaking again to some of the concerns that that Robin from the Parks and Recreation Commission and others are definitely things that we're looking at the urban greening plan, that proximity and equitability and all of the issues of different types of open space, pocket parks, urban plazas. We'd like to continue to look look at all of those other needs as well. So does that help?
Thank you.
Okay. Do you have any?
I have comments but no questions, so if
Okay.
anybody
Do
has
you have any
questions.
questions? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'm very enthused about this project and really thank the community members who made this happen. This is a upsurge, upswelling, and you could say it was at the last minute, but we've known about the need for more open space for many years, and sometimes opportunities come, and if we're not ready to take advantage of them, as several of the speakers pointed out, we'll lose that opportunity. I think there are certainly a lot of other parks and recreation needs and things we could use WW money for, but not all of those opportunities have the same ability to be leveraged as much as this project does, has been pointed out very comprehensively by the Trust for Public Land and some of the other speakers and the fundraising that's taking place. So I think it's a wonderful project and will be a real asset to our community, and I really thank our partners with the Trust for Public Land for negotiating, which seems like a very fair price for such a magnificent addition to our public lands.
I think I want to just make a couple of comments as well. And I had, I think, a very similar reaction to some, or similar skepticism when the project was first brought to us, in wanting to make sure that we are serving our whole community. And this is kind of jumping to the front of the list because the seller and the opportunity has come up, and is that the right way to do things? And when I started on the council, I lived in those apartments just a couple blocks away and really walked to the park and was very reliant on having an open space near my apartment, and loved open space because obviously when you live in an apartment you don't want to stay indoors for much of the day. So I too was extremely cognizant and skeptical about whether or not it would be the right decision to purchase this property, given all of the competing needs. The reason I am supportive at this point and am happy to support this motion are a lot of the things that have to do with the purchase and sale agreement. I think the incentives that are set up are excellent. Like Stephen said, TPL cannot function by working for free and paying for appraisals and paying for closing costs. So I think it's a great show on their part of putting all those up as a show of confidence of how good they believe they are getting grants. So that's a great incentive on their part. We have another incentive for the private groups who have shown a lot of enthusiasm and fortitude in terms of coming forward to do some soft fundraising. I also like the appraisal protection that we are agreeing to a sale price at this point, but not until the appraisal is supportive of that sale price. And I was gratified to learn, I hadn't remembered what we had spent Measure WW funds on so far, but we've spent it on Creekside Park and Cerrito Vista parks that are accessible to folks in the flats, and on Gilman Fields, which is obviously not walking distance from El Cerrito, but is still something that is widely used by the city, by city residents. So for all of these reasons, I'm really enthusiastic about this project, but I am extremely interested in, when we get to the point of urban greening, of really taking a deliberative look at how we are serving our residents and how we're engaging our residents, because I completely hear what Commissioner Mitchell said, which is there is a large segment of our population that we won't see in these chambers, and we can only hope to get their opinions in other methods, hopefully by the methods that Melanie and our consultant are undertaking to try to get more input from a broader range of folks in our city. But for this property, I think I'm enthused, and this map is just an incredible map for what it'll do for our city's connectivity and for all of the great open space that if we don't take this opportunity now, the alternative is to let the seller sell it to somebody else, potentially have another battle over development, or we can take this opportunity now and lock it down for forever. So I'm enthused to support this resolution.
Okay, I'm not going to comment on anything that's already been said by my council colleagues, but I also want to make it very clear that if we did not use WW funds, this project would not be taking place. We couldn't use money from the general fund. If anybody sat through our budget woes over the last 3 meetings prior to this, you'd understand that this really wouldn't be possible unless it was done this way. The stars are now aligned. We did an incredible amount of due diligence. I think the fact that we decreased the sale price as much as we did, that the seller has some tax needs that make this movement necessary now. Having been a Park and Rec Commissioner for 8 years, I get it. We have field users, we have hikers, we have gardeners. I was a tennis player. I raised $125,000 to build the third court on the Arlington because our teams couldn't play there anymore. I will challenge the trail trekkers to do better than the tennis players did. We had 2 casinos nights, and we had 50-50 clubs. And, we raised a lot of money, and we had money left over, and we gave it back to the city for some tennis programs. So there's always competing needs. We have to make those tough decisions. But the bottom line is this wouldn't be possible to be done and completed without the use of WW funds. And, hopefully we'll be as successful as we always have been in our grant writing and our grant acceptances and passages, that we're going to get some money and not use as much WW funds as we're now anticipating. And I think it's true. If we let this opportunity pass, there could be development there with houses, and I don't think any of us really want to see that. So I, too, am really in support of this. And I suppose for people who may not understand, or people at home, that when we're negotiating real estate, it is in closed session. We can't bring that information forward to Park and Rec Commission or anyone else. And the process was probably a little clumsy on our part, but just understand why it was done the way it was done. So, thank you.
Thank you. And I guess I'll close out the comments by saying I'm also pretty excited about this project, and I actually look back further perhaps than anyone else in my comments, at least in looking at our general plan, and that our general plan called for open space. And if you look at element after element of our general plan, you see references, I think, along the way in a lot of the areas that refer to that sort of thing. And I think that this is fulfilling the positive vision of that general plan, which at this point is quite old. But, and it's an important vision, I think, for the future of our city. We're an urban city, and we're a dense city. We're the second densest city, I believe, if I remember correctly, in the county. And just behind San Pablo is the city that's more dense than El Cerrito. And so what open space we have is very precious. And so to have this unique opportunity to gain this open space is really quite special. And I think we are just plain lucky to have the staff that we have and to have found the associates that we have to help us find the money, so that in fact what we can do is use this money twice. Once by in essence using it temporarily from WW, and then getting it in other sources, and then bringing, if all goes well, bringing the WW money back into the open to be used again for other needs. So I think we're in a really good position, and I look forward to our immediate vote on this object. So with that, if there's nothing else to be said, is there a motion?
I'm happy to move a resolution of the City Council of the City of El Cerrito authorizing the city manager or his designee to enter into a purchase and sale and professional services agreement with the Trust for Public Land to acquire APN 505-142-014, and the same APN number except it ends in 012 and 013, adjacent to the city-owned Hillside Natural Area.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposition, abstentions? Motion carries unanimously. And thank you to all of the numerous audience members who came in and expressed your opinions tonight. Thank you. And with that, we'll move on to item 7B on the agenda, which is the results of the survey by Godby Research on the development of the future city facilities. We'll take just a second to, for people who don't want to stay. This doesn't mean you don't have an interesting survey that everyone's leaving.
Yeah, I'll start. Ready? Great. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Abelson. I'm Karen Pincus. I'm the Assistant City Manager. And tonight we're here to present to you the results of a survey that was conducted by Godby Research regarding development of future city facilities. One of the goals of the city's strategic plan identifies develop and rehabilitate public facilities as community focal points. And the strategies that we've outlined for this goal include continuing to assess facilities to prioritize and strategize investment. For example, library, public safety building, senior center, community center. In this year's adopted budget, no funds are identified in our capital improvement program for investment in either rehabilitating or building new library, public safety, or community center facilities. A number of factors have contributed to this, including the economy, the loss of our redevelopment agency, and lack of available grant funding. Because no new revenue streams have been identified, nor projected actually, the city staff has concluded that it appears our best method for obtaining new revenue for funding such public facilities would be generated by a measure approved by the voters of El Cerrito. To that end, in May of this year, Godby Research performed a statistically valid survey related to potential revenue measures. And I'd like to introduce in a moment Brian Godby, who conducted the survey. He is the president and founder of Godby Research. Staff has felt that it is important to continue to survey our residents to determine priorities for such unfunded projects and whether or not there may be a willingness to go forward on a future ballot measure. Brian is going to present the results to you, and following Brian's presentation, staff can discuss and answer questions and receive feedback from the council as to next steps for going forward for such a measure or any next steps for future consideration. So with that, I'd like to again introduce Brian Godby of Godby Research.
Thank you, Karen. Members of the council, pleased to be here this evening to talk with you about the results of this recent survey. I want to jump in here. As you know, the purpose of this survey was to, and as Karen described, was to look at voter priorities and support for either a public safety, a library, a community center, or a senior center bond measure. And we have a real specific methodology, which I'll speak about in a moment, to do that. And then it makes the survey a little more complicated than we might have done in some of the earlier surveys that we've presented to you. We want to also, of course, look at the tax rates to see what might be affordable, to look at projects and programs, basically the subcomponents of these major facilities, to see what the priorities are, to look at both supporting and opposing arguments, and it's important to do both sides of the coin because we're trying to look at the real world, not just the one we'd like to live in. And then we also in this survey tested an alternative approach given our experience with Measure A and doing a special sales tax for roads. That's certainly possible for other facilities as well. So we look at that as an alternative to a more traditional general obligation bond approach, which would be the typical way to fund these kinds of projects. And then, of course, in the detailed report, which we won't go into tonight, there are certainly demographic and behavioral characteristics and crosstabs and pages on pages of data to sift through if you like. So the methodology is similar to what we've done in the past. It was a telephone survey. Our universe was likely presidential voters, meaning the broadest likely voter universe that we could look at, and that would be November 2016. Even though November 14 is also a general election, it is only a gubernatorial one, so the turnout is not as high. But that is a subset of the November 2016 presidential election, so it is part of this analysis as well. And then we also looked at the primaries, which are actually similar percentage turnout in both 2014 and 2016. We were in the field from May 29th through June 10th. The survey was just short of 19 minutes long. The sample size for each of those three groups that I mentioned was 504 for the November 2016 election, 399 for the November 2014, and then 308 for the primary elections. And you can see that they're concentric circles going to higher turnout elections. In terms of the margin of error, for the largest it was 4.3, then 4.8, then 5.5, so the error rate is roughly similar when we're looking at all of the data for each of the various elections. The other component of this, because we're looking at three basic facility types, public safety is one, library is a second, and the senior center, community facilities being a third, you can't test, well, what do you think about public safety? What do you think about a senior center? What do you think about a library in succession? Because each one will be reduced by 10%. Even though you may say, well, what if this were the only one on the ballot? They never in a survey hear it that way. They always think, wow, you got three measures you're coming at me with. And so the support declines. So the way to solve that problem is to do what's called a split sample. And what that means is that you take the interviews you have, and a third of them in this case are asked the public safety ballot measure. A third of them are asked the library, and a third of them are asked the community senior center facility measure. That increases the error rate slightly, but not dramatically. And it gives us the ability to compare them in a fair head-to-head, what's the best case for each one of those, and then you can see what's the preference among the voters or their priorities. So that also makes for a fairly complicated survey in terms of its length, and some of these slides that will follow because of that I will try to be brief. But if I'm going too fast, certainly stop me and ask a question. In that split sampling approach, the first question that we asked is in the box on the right-hand side of this slide, and it's the wording for the public safety bond measure. Now, again, this is a general obligation bond measure, and what that means is that you're pledging the full faith and credit of the city to repay the bonds, but there is no tax rate in the ballot question. So it is different than a parcel tax. Parcel tax is more familiar in many cases, in school district cases certainly, and what the difference is you actually see the tax amount. So is it $100 per parcel, or is it 7.5 cents per square foot as it is with the school district? But if you think back to the school district bond measure, which was also on the ballot last year, there was both the parcel tax, which was cents per square foot, and then there was this X $100 million bond measure. But the bond measure never talks about a tax rate in the ballot question. That's really important because that we're trying to mirror what happens on the ballot. This is similar to that school bond measure in that it doesn't have a tax rate in it. It has the gross amount of the bonds. And that's the difference between a bond measure and a parcel tax, essentially. They're both property taxes, though. It's just a different approach. So what we've done here is we've tried to guess what we think from previous surveys we've done what the best features of a public safety building would be and put those in the bullets in this particular question. We're also constrained by the fact that this has to be 75 words when it gets to the ballot, so we don't want to undersell it by using fewer than that, and we don't want to oversell it because we don't live in that world. And so this is at that 75-word limit. As you can see here, the support for the measure in November 14 is at 56% in round numbers. In November 16 is 57%, virtually identical statistically. That includes both the definitely yes and the probably yes. We can do that methodologically because the way we ask this question is we say, would you vote yes or no, get an answer, and then ask them, is that definitely or probably on either side of the equation. So you can correctly aggregate the numbers, or you can disaggregate them to see how strong or how soft the support is. Because this requires 2/3, it's not so much a question about strength of support, we're just not there. Even with error rate on the upside, which we would rarely counsel to do, we're not there. The next measure, same set of caveats as the general obligation bond measure, and you can see in the box on the right-hand side the actual wording for this particular measure for the library. In this case, aggregating the definitely and probably yes for the November 14 election, we have 64%, and for the November 16, we have 69% in round numbers. So that's not a bad place to be when all they know is the wording that we've seen in this box. We haven't told them anything else about the library measure. And that exceeds the 2/3 threshold required to pass a bond today. But it doesn't exceed it by the error rate that we talked about earlier.
Could I just clarify one thing? Certainly. So in the 75 words, you wouldn't say what the tax rate would be, but isn't it the next section on the ballot that voters get that talks about how much this would mean?
Well, yes and no. It's not on the actual ballot where they are marking.
Not arguments?
It's not in the arguments. It's in the voter handbook.
Okay.
And it's called a tax rate statement.
Okay.
But most people would be hard-pressed to find it.
Okay.
And it's in very technical language, so it's not accessible as the ballot question is. So whether they vote absentee or whether they vote in a voting booth, the last thing that they see would be the 75 words.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Now, I did say that it's 2/3 today. There is talk in the legislature about what's become an omnibus measure to reduce the threshold for a lot of things, everything from school parcel taxes to transportation sales taxes at the countywide level to a 55% majority. That's still talk. There's been legislation introduced. It hasn't passed out of committee yet. It will have to go to the voters in November of 14 and be approved statewide before it changes the threshold. So we're counseling all of our clients to keep your fingers crossed and hope for that, depending on your timing, but don't plan on it because there's lots of parts of the state that are unlikely to support that kind of measure. But this is a good place to start for a library. And then the third one that we tested, as I mentioned at the outset, was for the community center and senior centers and clubhouses. We get 60% in November 14, and we get 56% in November 16. So statistically about the same. Neither of those reach the 2/3 level that we need to be at currently, but they would put this in second position if we were ranking the three of these behind the library. The next chart shows a series of different tax rates that we did test. And even though I said earlier it's somewhat challenging sometimes to find the tax rate statement in the voter handbook, some people do, and so it's useful to have a sense of where you are in terms of a tax rate and what kind of support you get there. Now, you don't necessarily need to have 2/3 on this measure if you get 2/3 on a question that we're going to have subsequently that we'll talk about. But we don't want this to be a big problem, and I don't think it is, but it still suggests there's some work to be done. In general terms, $57, which you see here across the bottom, is the amount per 100,000 of assessed valuation that people would have to pay in order to get $25 million for a general obligation bond, regardless of what it was for. So we get a positive score at roughly 55% in November 16 and slightly below that, but not statistically significant in November 14. That's a good indication. Again, they don't know anything more than those 75 words at this point, and, oh yeah, it's a tax, which we're really underscoring with this kind of question. But it does tell us that it's not a big red light, just that we're going to need to explain what any one of these facilities would be about. This also is an aggregate of all three different bond measures, so there are some differential tax rates based on, or differential support for different tax rates based on what the bonds that are being asked, but that's not reflected in this particular chart. And error rates tend to make that a little confusing anyway. So this is just the average, if you will. The next three sets of slides are really going to become eye charts, and I apologize for that. For each of the bond measures, we asked a list of features or what we might spend the money on. And the way we did that is we read an item, in this case, the public safety, fire and police building that meets earthquake standards. Does that make you more or less likely to support the measure? We then get an answer and then say, is that much more likely or somewhat more likely on either side of the equation? When we're done with all the interviewing, we assign numeric values of which you see part of across the bottom of this chart. A much more likely is a 2, a somewhat more likely is a 1, a no effect is a 0, a somewhat less likely, which is not shown here, but as part of the calculation, is a -1, and a much less likely is a -2. So we have a scale that runs from a +2 to a -2, and we're basically averaging what the scores are, and it just makes it easier to understand and to rank them with a great deal of nuance. This table breaks into 2 tiers. The first 4 items are in the top tier, and they range in the November 16, which I'm going to use as sort of the reference throughout this, because clearly in the November 16 for the library we do the best. The November 16 is the green bars of each of these 2, and in the November 16 at the top of this, fire and police building that meets earthquake standards is a 0.75 on our scale. That equates to 62.4%, more likely to support the measure. Falls short of the 2/3 requirement to pass the measure, and that is our best feature of this particular bond measure. We tail off from there into the 50s, even in the top tier, and then the bottom tier goes down to a 0.2 on our scale, which really could be a 0, meaning it's a wash. Half of the people are on one side and half of the people are on the other side. So there's not a lot of strength in these particular features at this point. Now, if we look at the library in a comparative sense, you'll see that it's substantially higher. Scale is the same as we've talked before, using that ranking. You can see all of it here in this particular chart. The highest item we have here is a 0.99, so that's quite a bit higher than the top item in the public safety building, and that is safe, energy efficient library that meets earthquake and fire codes, and that's 73%. At least somewhat more likely to support the measure. So you can see, given the 62% we saw in public safety, there's a big swing. That's a 10-point difference in the top argument. The next one is at 69.7, 70% children's area and parents, for parents, children, reading space, improving access for seniors with disabilities, space for public access, computers and a computer lab, space for literacy tutoring programs, and a new 21st century library in general. All of those are 2/3 or higher. So these features of the library test much better than the public safety building does. At least the top tier. There are some that are lower down, but there's better lists at the top. Moving on to the features of the community center or senior center or clubhouses, again thinking about the green bars, There are some items here that score above the 2/3 as well. And in Tier 1, we have the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 items from a new community center and park clubhouse with multi-purpose rooms down to fine art, pottery, and craft studios. Those range from 68%, at least somewhat more likely, to down to 64%, somewhat more likely. So there are several items here that also are above the 2/3 threshold. Interestingly enough, some of the things that are on this list, multi-purpose use rooms, are not exclusive to a community center or senior center, but they are also can be built into a library. So some of the features on this list would work for the library as well.
Could you just clarify how this question was asked? So after they gave the responses on whichever facility they were speaking about and about the tax rate, then you kind of asked the question again of, you kind of reread the ballot question, but with these features stressed?
We don't reread the ballot question. We say, in essence, the measure we're talking about will pay for a lot of different programs or projects within the rubric that we're talking about. If you knew that it would include a new community center with park clubhouses with multi-purpose rooms, would you be more or less likely?
Oh, I see. Okay.
So we're really just focusing on that part, not the entire ballot question.
Okay.
Can I ask a question about that?
Certainly.
I think I noticed on the public safety issue that on earthquakes, that meet earthquake standards are the key words, but then if you flip over to the next screen, so that's, you see the same wording except different.
Except it's for the library now, right?
Yeah, and then it's a different one, so.
And it's a different, substantially higher here.
Right, so that's kind of saying that it's only partly because of the feature, it's partly because it's the library.
That's true. That's absolutely true.
So I assume that would apply to any category.
Right. And that's why we keep them all split. They're part of what's probably going on here. Obviously, this is a survey, not a focus group. And if we were in a focus group, we might say, why is, and if we were comparing them, why is the earthquake and safety codes more important in a library than it is in the public safety building? And they may say, well, because I go to it. But this, we didn't go there. That's completely conjecture. But it is correct that there's a difference, and there's got to be some reason for that difference.
And is that often true?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, one of the challenges, candidly, that public safety buildings have, both in surveys and in focus groups we've done, is, well, fire equipment needs to get out of a public safety building, as you know, in an earthquake. They would rather think that the police are always in their neighborhood. And so they don't see the need as often for the public safety building to be as survivable. You have to explain it more than the library, where they instantly think library has kids in it. Okay, I get that. Mm-hmm. Which is not to say that the other isn't important as well, as you know. So the next question that we switched to was a set of supporting statements, and this one too is long and complicated and split into actually 4 parts. The first part here is of questions that we asked of all 3 samples. So think of these as positive statements, and we said pretty much the same thing. In this case, the first one is given that the measure would give El Cerrito local control over local funds and could not be taken by the state. If you heard that, would you be more or less likely to support the measure? Now, this only has the much more likely or somewhat more likely side of the equation. It doesn't actually have the less likely, because we've characterized them as positive statements, and it doesn't make sense that a positive statement would make you less likely to support the measure. So it particularly doesn't make sense on the phone when other things are going on in the background. So the scale changes a little bit, and necessarily these numbers move up. But there are a variety of different positives here that would be common to all of them. And in fact, on this chart, the top 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 are all basically tied at the same level. And those include, like I just said, give El Cerrito local control over local funds that can't be taken by the state. That's virtually the highest argument in every survey that we do, whatever it is for. And that's 65%, at least somewhat more likely in the November 16 environment. New facilities will use green materials is also a positive. It's at 64%. If I jump down the list, though, you can see I'm starting to go down below the two-thirds level. Citizens oversight and mandatory financial audits, that's only 60% more likely to support the measure. So you can see that that's dropping below substantially below the two-thirds level. But there are some things to work with here. Now again, as we did with the features, on the positive statements, we broke them down into the 3 specific libraries with specific things. At the top of this list, we would make sure that fire and police building is operational in emergency, which sort of speaks to that point that we just discussed. And that is 66%, at least somewhat more likely. So when you put it in that context, people say, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And we get to the two-thirds level, but just to the two-thirds level. We don't actually exceed that. Next is maintain emergency response times for both police and fire at virtually the same level as is the third one, El Cerrito. Police department crime prevention efforts will be more effective, and then in the top tier is also police facility doesn't have adequate space for evidence. While it's in the top tier, it's down to 61%, at least some more.
Just to clarify what you said, it says here in the text above the bar charts, current police station is not big enough to support current EC police department, made at least 60% of the voters somewhat more likely, but you said it equates to about two-thirds support. Overall?
No, the first one it does. The last one.
The first one.
Yeah, the fourth one down is the 60%.
Got it. Thank you.
Or higher than 60% going up to the top 4. But the key takeaway is here, we do get to two-thirds for the public safety. We need to have the building operational in an emergency, but we just get to two-thirds. When we turn to the next slide, again, these are the positive statements for the library, we see higher scores. At the top of this list, we have the positive that the new library will be larger than the current library. That's 1.17 ranking there of the green bar for the November 16 is 72%, at least somewhat more likely. So again, you see that the top positive for the library is higher than the top positive for the public safety building. And in fact, the top 2 are at 72% here. The second one being new library will offer after school and summer programs for youth. Then we start dropping down into the mid-60s with the next 3 positives. In terms of the community senior center clubhouse bond measure, we have some good scores here as well. They're basically all at the top tier. They're all pretty good but not statistically different from each other. Offer after school and summer programs for youth is 69%. Help pay for operational and generating operations by generating rental revenue is 64%. Create more programs for older and younger adults is 66%. Spaces for recreation, health, and wellness activities, 65%. Educational and recreational activities for senior at 69%. So those are all in that two-thirds range. The important note here again is that several of these things could happen in a library too. It gets back to that multi-purpose room kind of multi-purpose use that can be accommodated in libraries as well as community or senior centers. So at that point, we turn to the opposite side of the equation, as I mentioned at the outset, and test opposition statements or things that might be negatives. And we do this the same way we tested the positives. We read the item and say, if you heard that this hurts seniors and those on fixed incomes, would you be more likely to oppose the measure or somewhat more likely to oppose the measure? So the higher the score, the more negative. We don't put a minus sign in front of it to make it seem bad. And while it seems sort of strange when you're thinking about it from a plus-minus scenario, it makes more sense to do it this way to the interviewee on the phone. and we've done it that way over the years, and successfully so. So that top item, hurt seniors and those on fixed income, doesn't necessarily have to be true. It just has to be something that the opposition might say.
And is it typical to lump those two together?
Yes. Yeah, we see that. I mean, not so much from our perspective, but from reading ballot arguments against, it very often is. Yeah.
It's very often spoken, whether or not it's true.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, we see it all the time in ballot arguments against measures. And it is usually, they focus, they're trying to evoke an emotional response. So they're looking for, it doesn't matter what we're building, right, or what the money would be spent for. It's all about how do they evoke that emotional response. And we're just trying to reflect that to make sure that we're being accurate in terms of what happens in the real world. And I guess the other point is that whilst these are not necessarily true, there's no way to vet that in the world of ballot arguments.
I can see a nice Venn diagram, but okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, the reality is the pro side gets to say whatever they want, and nobody can stop them from doing that. And we are sort of more bound by the truth because people will contest it. But the negative side, they're not. And you see negative ballot arguments are all over the map. So again, at the top of this list is hurt seniors and those on fixed income. That's actually 51% more likely to oppose the measure. And I think that is the big driver. And probably the most important takeaway from this is that it's important to explain what a bond measure is. Now, a bond measure doesn't have a senior exemption like a parcel tax does. But at the same time, it has a de facto senior advantage that nobody thinks of when they're kind of at the top line level here. And that is that if you bought your house 30 years ago, you're not paying what your neighbor who just bought the house next door is paying in terms of your mortgage or your property tax. And in fact, in some cases, it could be a tenth of what the current property taxes are, since it's based on assessed valuation at the time of purchase, not current market value. And that is a big deal and complicated process to explain to seniors who are responding negatively based on that argument. Public employee salaries and benefits are out of control was the second highest, and that's at 41% more likely to oppose it. The economic recovery is fragile, is also at 41%, and wouldn't need the measure if we hadn't wasted our tax dollars. Again, doesn't matter if it's true or not. We know it's not, but that's at 37% more likely to oppose the measure. So that's right, or getting very close to the 1/3 level that we'd like these to be below. I think, as I said, the hurt seniors, that needs to be addressed. The public safety, or the public employee salaries, and benefits needs to be addressed. By the time this might be on the ballot, the economic recovery may have solved itself. And people won't be saying it's fragile as it is today, but that's the way we have to deal with today's environment. So some negatives, and particularly one that I think is impactful and we will have to address as we move forward. At this point in the survey, they've heard the general description of each of the ballot measures separately. They've heard tax rates. They've heard what we'd spend the money on. They've heard positives. They've heard negatives. They have not really said, I'm thinking about this negative versus that positive. But at this point, we force them to synthesize everything that they've heard, just like what happens on Election Day or Election Month if you vote absentee. And we come back to the ballot question, and they've heard all these things, pro and con, and they have to make up their mind. For the public safety building, you can see we are at 56% in November 14, 57% in November 16. That's actually a 0.3% decline from the first test, not statistically significant, but the bottom line is in neither an election environment do we get to the 2/3 or approach the 2/3 environment. For the library, in November 14, we're at 63%. And in November 16, we're at 67%, so that exceeds the 2/3 level. It does not cover the error rate that we have to deal with, but it does exceed the 2/3 level. at the margin, and that did come down 1% from the first test. And again, I think that the senior argument against is what's driving that here, particularly since seniors tend to like libraries and support libraries, but if they know that the tax is going to hurt them, that's obviously had an impact, although statistically speaking, there isn't a difference between this and the first test either. And then finally, with the community center, senior center clubhouse bond, we're at 61% in November 14 and 63% in November 16. That's actually an increase of some 6.5% from the first test in November 16. So that comes up substantially, but not enough to get to the 2/3 level. So clearly the library is the priority in this comparison of the three facilities. Not to say that the others aren't important, they are, but the library just fares better at the ballot. Now the last three slides that I've got just summarize quickly that alternative approach, which would be what if this were a special tax for, special sales tax for just those facilities. For the public safety building, we actually lose support down to 47% in 14 and 49% in 16. For the library, we lose support as well. It's down to 60% in 14 and 59 in 16. And for the community senior clubhouse bond, we're at 52 and 57 respectively. So we lose support everywhere for if it's a sales tax. Having said that, there is also a position bias built into this that is not calculable. And what that is the reason for it simple is to make it give us the best test of each one without having a list of taxes. We're breaking that rule here. We're having a list of tax. We're having a second tax. So you've heard bond measure for library and then sales tax for library. So this always goes lower, and it ranges between 5 and 10 points lower because of the position bias that it has. And just without split sampling 6 different ways, which is not practical in El Cerrito, and it's expensive, there's just no other way to do it. But I still think that the support for a sales tax approach as opposed to a bond approach is more problematic. So, in summary, we think that there is certainly a numerical base of support for a library bond measure in the November 16 election universe, and that it makes sense to begin preparing for that possibility. There's a lot of things to do as staff can identify, and I'll leave that to them. While support for the library bond is higher in 16, it is statistically the same in 14. Whether you could make a 14 ballot or not is questionable in terms of the details that have to be put in place. But again, we still sort of like the November 16 because there is better support, and it is a presidential election, so the type of turnout is different. And so we would expect to do better in that election environment. There is, because of the air rates, while the library appears to be the favorite, I have to note that they are really not that much difference between all three of the measures. But if I had to bet, I would bet that the library would win and the other two probably wouldn't, even with the air rates, because we don't see that we're that far off in most cases. In terms of the tax rates, there's a little sensitivity, as we discussed, at $57, which is the $25 million bond. $50 does a little better, but that doesn't get you the resources you need. So we need to keep that in mind. And what that probably suggests is that you need to start planning this process, not just plan, and if you decide on a library, not just doing the details of planning a library and coming up with the financial numbers and all of the details that would go into that, but also starting the community outreach, because there is some softness in the tax rate for all of the measures, or each of the measures, to be more correct. And we don't really cover the air rate even for the library, so there is some work to do. This is not just to put it put on the calendar a date in 2016 where you're going to put it on the ballot and then hope to win. You're going to have to do some work. And I think the intervening time between now and when you put this measure on the ballot includes not only planning and having a specific program for the voters to vote on, but also having done outreach to the voters and talking to them about the needs for the library, if that's your choice. And that means there's some work to do. And then, of course, there's a campaign, as there was for Measure A and as there was for Measure R. But it's probably more like the campaign for Measure A than it was the campaign for Measure R, because Measure R was only a simple majority.
Measure R was what?
Measure R only required a simple majority because it was a general tax, whereas Measure A was a specific tax. Obviously, they were both sales taxes, but this is a special tax, and it requires 2/3 today. That could change, but we can't plan for that until it happens.
Yeah, I just had a question, since you said you're a betting man. So my question is, if the 2014 ballot measure actually did pass, would you say that as far as comparing the library to the public safety to the community center, would you say that they would all have equal chance of passing if that were the case in 2000? I mean, we'd still go for this in 2016, but the threshold for voting, yes, would be different.
Yeah, that's correct. It would probably be 55%. That's what everybody's been talking about. And what I think it means is that the library covers the error rate then, because we're at 67%. We've got about a 7-point error rate, so that's down to 60, and we've got a 5% cushion.
Right.
The community senior clubhouse is not quite as good, but there's still, when you do the math, a little bit of a cushion between where it would wind up probably in the mid-50s and 55%. The public safety building doesn't have that.
Yeah.
If you take the error rate out, you're still below 55%.
Well, and it's like you said, the library is visible. It's seen in a different way.
Right.
Children are there, and most of us probably don't end up in the police station, which is a good thing.
Right.
All right. Politically speaking, if you go November of 2014 with the bond measure and you narrowly fail, is that going to make it harder to pass it in 2016?
I don't think it does from the voters' perspective. I think what it does is from your core supporters, the people who are out walking precincts, the people who are contributing to a campaign. Obviously, that's all independent of the city. It makes it very difficult for them to say, I'm going to muster all that effort again. And it is a bigger effort going from 2014 to 2016 because the turnout increases. So the costs of running a campaign necessarily go up because there are more people to reach, whether that is door to door or with direct mail. There are just simply more people that are voting, so you have to talk to more people. When the reverse happens, when you fail in a larger turnout election like the presidential and then follow up with a lower turnout, that's actually easier because you don't have to talk to as many people. You've covered everybody already, and you just have to work on the people who are swing voters.
It's interesting. And then my other question is, once we pass a measure for the library or the public safety building, how long after that would we actually have the building complete? Approximately. I'm looking to the city manager. I wouldn't expect the pollster to know this one. Although you've seen many campaigns and many buildings built probably, so maybe you could answer.
Assuming we have a site, it's probably 2 to 3 years.
2 to 3 years. Thanks.
No questions?
Well, I had another question, and that is, so if some of the things that polled real high were things like, as far as the library is concerned, the after-school programs, helping children with homework, that kind of thing, and those are programming items, let's say. It really doesn't have anything to do with the status of the library. And so right now we have restricted hours for the library because we're not being supported by the county library system, and they have their funding issues. I mean, just the county-wide, not just the library. So if you were going to do a bond measure, and I guess maybe this is a city attorney question, I don't really know, can you do any money for programming? I mean, how do you address that unmet need, basically? And I don't. Maybe you don't even know that answer. I mean, maybe it's a stupid question.
No, I don't think it's stupid.
It's absolutely not a stupid question. It's just it's one that is complicated. For the most part, the answer is no. My experience with this is that working with bond counsel, there is sometimes some room for capital-related expenditures that go to programming, but that for the most part, you can't entirely fund a library-related program out of a general obligation bond. The money has to be spent on programming. There are tangential expenses that can go to support programming, though, and then you're down to a conversation with your bond counsel about the propriety of the support for the program relative to the approved uses of the bond proceeds.
And the items that you see here on the chart are summaries. What we wind up doing with all bonds is we talk about the spaces to provide the programs,
right?
Which is sort of the best way to get to the outcome. I mean, at the end of the day, people don't want a building just to have a building. They want a building for some activity to take place, and that's the real benefit of it. So you have to make that bridge from, if we don't have the space or to do whatever program we're talking about, we can't do it, and that works better. It's sort of for all bond measures, that's the case. We don't really talk about the bricks and mortar as much as the benefits of the bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
And to add to that, additionally, a lot of what was provided to Brian as far as some of the positive statements that staff discussed were taken from the 2006 needs assessment and the building program, some of the survey results, and will continue to feed toward the update that we've scheduled. So all of these features, as opposed to building a building to fit a bunch of programs in, this would help inform the architect in the future as to how to build the building because we want these features in it. So it actually does have some synergy there, but we are very cognizant that yes, any additional hours, any additional programming, that's the responsibility of the city. And whether it's in a measure or not, that is something we definitely need to address in the future.
So I have a question that maybe is a little bit off point, that it kind of surprised me about the data. There's been just so much talk about lowering the sales tax threshold or changing the ceiling so that you can have, for example, we're at the ceiling here, so we actually couldn't in the next several years do a sales tax, correct?
No, I think there is some room.
There is some room?
There is. It's 2% split between the county and the city, and right now I think
the Transportation Authority thinks we're preventing them from doing it.
I don't believe that the two together add up to 2%.
I don't mean the county, the Transportation
Authority
gets thrown in there
that's
too.
counted. That's counted as part of the county's share.
Okay.
So including CCTA, I don't believe that it adds up to 2%.
Okay, that's very interesting because, I mean, it really is because they think it is.
I think that's a really good question, and I have a follow-up to that, if it's okay. Is that threshold only for general sales tax? For example, I'm very interested at some point in proposing a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages, and that would be a specific sales tax. Would that count against the threshold also?
It would. The way the revenue and taxation code provisions are written, it's 2%. So what we're really talking about is a transactions and use tax, which is defined somewhat differently from the sales tax. It's all the same rate when you go to the store and buy something. But the way the revenue and taxation code provisions are written, it's 2%, regardless of whether or not it's general or special. And between the city and the county, and from the Board of Equalization's perspective, local transportation authorities, sales tax measures count as part of the county's portion of it, so they count towards the 2% as well. So all of those combined can't exceed 2%, whether or not it's general or special. And in most cases, the county and the transportation ones end up being special taxes. So they end up it all counts towards the same 2%.
No matter what percentage of goods sold end up getting the tax applied?
It's the way, I mean, it's hard to, I realize it's a little bit weird talking about percentages or what you mean by a percentage changes depending on certain things, but the way the state law is written, it says you can, the city, and the county can both have authority to do this, but the total rate between the two can't add more than 2% to the existing statewide sales tax rate. So if the statewide rate is, I forget what it is right now, 7.5 or that can't be right. I'm not sure exactly what the state rate is, but you can't go 2% above that combining county and city taxes.
And what about, for example, BART, which is multi-county?
I believe they're counted as a transportation authority, but they may have special.
They're in the 2%?
I'm actually not positive about BART because they may have special legislation authorizing them to implement a sales tax. I'm not positive about that.
Okay. Could we get the answer?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, good question.
Because what I was kind of wondering, because the result, getting back to my initial question, I kind of assumed that in our jurisdiction it's easier to pass a sales tax because the last several times around, that's what it's looked like.
Yeah, I think it's easy. Certainly, it's easy to, you can say it's easier to pass a simple majority or general sales tax, which is what we did with Measure R, and we did. So yeah, it's easier.
But A was 2/3.
But A was 2/3. But A was in a different world.
Mm-hmm.
A was before the stock market collapsed and before the recession started, and it was in a very, very positive primary election for tax measures. Up and down the state, we saw measures passing all over the place because of the turnout for President Obama, then Senator Obama. Measure R was in a world where the economy had already tanked. We're clearly in a world where we have a fragile recovery, and people are still cognizant of that because we saw that as one of the negatives right now. Now, in 2 years or by 2014, that may have changed, and by 2016, one hopes it certainly will have changed, and that we might be in an environment more like the 2008. We can't tell that today because people can't. They just, no matter how many times you want to try to ask them, well, what do you think it's going to be like in 2016? They don't know. They're just voting, or either they're voting or talking to their pollster. They're talking about how they feel today. So we're not in that environment yet. We may be.
Okay. So any other comments? Are there speaker slips?
We have one request to speak.
Okay.
Tom Panis.
Good evening, Mayor Pro Tem Abelson, members of the council, and city staff. My name is Tom Panis, and I live at 7345 Fairmount in El Cerrito. The new library committee would like to thank the city and Godby Research for the carefully constructed and thorough polling that was performed in May, as well as the careful analysis that was assembled and so enlighteningly presented by Mr. Godby this evening. You won't be surprised to hear that we on the committee were pleased by the results of the poll. Our review of the polling results tell us that the community strongly supports a new library. Now a lot of hard work begins. The number of topics that the city and the community will need to jointly address in the next months and years is large. Some of these include the entire community needs to be drawn into the process of deciding what the final project will actually include and not include. We have to develop criteria for site selection and review sites. We need to fundraise. We need to select an architect. We need to analyze the various ways to pay for the project. We need to organize a campaign to ensure the financing plan is approved by the voters, and a lot more. The new library committee plans and expects to be involved in all these activities. We stand at your disposal. wanting to help with any and every task. We look forward to the day a financial plan is approved by the citizens of El Cerrito, and beyond that, we look forward to the day El Cerrito's new library opens. Thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. And I guess the only other question I would have is, so now what is our next step? Is it what's said in our packet?
Sure. So if the city council essentially concurs with the recommendation of Mr. Godby, particularly when it comes to pursue development of a library to place on the ballot, we're looking generally at November 2016. Then if that's the direction of the council this evening, then the staff will go and essentially do a lot of the homework and begin the homework process that we've discussed, including particularly siting selection, going out as a request for proposals for architectural services, all of the various reports that need to be done, public information, and what have you. And having a year or two to have that ample time to do that, I actually exchanged emails with Councilmember Bridges earlier. The more I think about all of the work we have to do, 2016 doesn't really seem that far away. And so with council's concurrence, we would come back to you later this year with more of a fleshing out of implementation, and particularly once the needs assessment is complete, the update is complete rather. I would also like to let you know that we do have a tentative date for the Contra Costa Library Strategic Planning meeting that will be held here at City Hall, would be September 9th. And I will get you more information on that as we flesh that out, but that will be held here, and that is actually going to be in partnership with the Contra Costa Library, not only for their strategic plan, but being able to give us and inform us on our needs assessment and the needs of the community. So that is actually happening currently. So that would be the direction that we would move if the council so agrees.
I have a question about that. So are they making, I shouldn't say special dispensation, but are they coming here because we asked them to, or are they going to all cities?
I believe they're going to all of the cities. That's what I've been told, but I am working directly with Liz Ruland, who's the librarian, our El Cerrito librarian, and she's excited about this whole process as well, and that we can essentially not duplicate efforts when it comes to finding out what the community wants in its library, not just for services, but what would fit within the building.
And the second question about the countywide strategic plan. It's starting now. When do they expect it to be complete? Because I think that's would dovetail with the needs assessment or help us with that information. I don't know the answer to that question. Does anybody have a real timeline?
We have a couple of county library commissioners in the audience. Would they be able to better answer that question? Sure, sorry.
I'm just trying to figure out where we are and where
Tom Panis, County Library Commissioner, 1745 Fairmount, El Cerrito. If I recall correctly, the last strategic plan was never finished 5 years ago. I don't think that's the intention this time, but I believe we're talking 6 to 12 months. Yeah. Stephen?
Thank you. I figured it would be that long.
Yeah.
About.
Janet?
Yes, go ahead, Mark.
I'm not willing to give up on November of 2014 as a possibility because realistically speaking, we're not going to have a library before 2019 if we wait till 2016, and I'm not sure our existing building is going to hold up for another 6 years. And if the threshold gets reduced to 55%, I think we could confidently go forward in November of 2014. So I'm not ready to accept the recommendation for 2016 because I'm optimistic that the statistical difference between the two was not so much staff time and what staff has on the various plates spinning in the air is a significant consideration, but I would much rather see us be aggressive and do whatever we can to not give up on getting this project completed earlier rather than later.
We can certainly explore that possibility as well.
That'd be great.
One comment, if I might. The approval to change the state constitution has to be on the November 2014 ballot.
Oh,
So,
okay,
now there has been some discussion that anything that is on the ballot locally could be grandfathered.
Right.
Based on the timing of.
And how the measure's
when
written, right.
their- Right, when their start takes effect and when ours takes effect. But there is a gamble associated with that. You might win and you might not. You might get 58% or 70, 60%, 60%, and it loses in Orange County big, and
I think
Not to point fingers.
If I could also add, if we were sitting here today and it's essentially a year out from when you'd have to place a measure on the ballot, if we had site control, then I think it would be a different story. But right now we don't.
Good point.
Can I
Because
ask,
it's going to be harder to get something passed if we don't have a site locked down that we can market in that campaign.
I have a question about this meeting that's on the 9th. Is that a daytime meeting or a nighttime
It'll
meeting?
be, I believe we've scheduled it for 7 p.m., yes.
Thank you.
And again, that's tentative right now. I'm going to confirm that with the county, but that's what we have tentatively scheduled right now, so.
Okay. How long, getting back to the question that Mark was asking about timing, how long does it take to run a complete campaign done well?
Well, I think if we again look
From
back,
this point in
yeah.
time?
If you we're thinking about November 14, just because it's the closest, the math works the same, or the timing works the same for 16. You've got 3.5 months really from when the council puts the measure on the ballot to the election. So that is the independent campaign. So that would be in either year, basically August or much of August, depending on your meeting schedule, September and October and the first week in November. To do a public information effort with a November election, you can't do a whole lot during the summer. So what that means is that you have to hit the ground running in January of the even year, and use January, February, March, and April and into May as your public outreach, community building, coalition building that can be done by the city, because you haven't made a decision to put something on the ballot, you're just asking for public input. Going back before that, you really can't do much during the holidays. You can do some work in the fall, so you could be doing work September and October of this year, doing that outreach and public information. Go then dark for the holidays, start again January through May, make a decision in probably late July, and then the campaign happens. That would be the ideal.
I guess that wasn't quite my question. My question was more, I was wondering about the elapsed time it takes if you were saying, if you were giving advice, and I'm not sure you do on that topic, but if you were giving advice on how to run a good, effective campaign that would maximize results, how long would that take? How long would that campaign take? Like 6 months, 12 months? What's the number?
Well, I think that it would start in January of that year, whether it's 2014 or 2016 at the latest, and that would be a concerted public process sponsored by the city, leading up to the council putting something on the ballot, and then having 3.5 months to run a political independent campaign. And if you do less than that, I think that that's problematic.
So what I'm looking for one number. So it looks to me like the number is
that's 10
almost
months.
a year.
Yeah, almost a year.
Yeah.
And for
But
the
you have to realize
political
there are dark times within that year where you're not
Yeah.
really doing a whole lot because it's the holidays or
The political equation for the fundraising part of that independent campaign is even more lead time, wouldn't you say?
That often happens once there's sort of clear direction when you're going, and there is time to do that. I mean, if the council is going to consider this again in either year in July of 14 or 16, you usually know that before that, and the library committee can start their fundraising. Having said that, we've done work for parcel tax and hopefully a bond in Marin County, and when they did their parcel tax in 2010, they started 2 years in advance. And by the time the Board of Supervisors put the measure on the ballot, countywide measure, they had already raised $200,000 for the campaign.
Right.
And could I ask one follow-up? For GO bonds for facilities, what's the minimum amount of information that gives voters sort of comfort about what you're going to do? The city manager mentioned site control. What is the minimum information the voters want to see that you have done in terms of due diligence for this building? And then how good do your cost estimates have to be for what you're going to do, and how conceptual can they be?
I think your cost estimates are important. You need to have an idea of what it's going to cost, and you have to live within that budget. I think you have to have an idea of what kinds of facilities or what kind of rooms you're going to have. We're going to have space for books, we're going to have space for children's programs, we're going to have those multi-purpose spaces that we talked about. But you don't have to have a drawing that says this is what it's going to look like. As a matter of fact, sometimes that's counterproductive.
I don't like that trim along the top.
Exactly. Everybody's an architectural critic.
Right. But you want a site.
I think you want a site.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. So in terms of, is there, the things that you mentioned, Karen, could be done, sounded to me like they had dollars attached to them unless staff was doing all the work? And which they
well, yes, absolutely.
They can't.
We're not going to do all the work. We would have to, particularly going out to bid for architectural services.
Okay,
should we hire public information consultants, et cetera.
Where were we thinking that money might come from?
We have not identified funding at this time for that either.
Okay, so what are you asking any decision at all of us now, or are you just going to be coming back later as it says?
Yes, our intent is to come back later, but I wanted to not only present the results to the council and make sure that you understand and had the ability to ask any questions, but essentially if this is the direction that we should be going to, and your concurrence with that. I believe I have notes to that effect. Unless there is any additional comments from the council, we can flesh out more of the details and bring that to you later.
Great.
Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for a very thorough report, very well presented. I appreciate it.
Thank you as always.
Thank you. And with that, let's move on to council assignments and liaison reports. Are there any?
Well, we heard from Park and Rec Commission a little bit tonight. They did meet on June 26th, and as Robin amply stated, there were some issues about not having a lot of information prior to the meeting because of the closed sessions. Comments made by more than one commissioner were that they weren't in favor of the project for Busby because there's nothing flat. It might serve a minority of users. Some people hadn't seen the property, weren't familiar with the property, and that, as commented on earlier, that a bigger portion than they wanted was being taken from WW funds. But ultimately, they did vote 3-2 with probably one of their longest meetings ever, that they would pass a motion to allow us to take up to $475,000 of WW funds for the Busby project. JPA met on, and one other thing about Park and Rec, I'm sorry, Chris, that I have to bring this up again, but I'm not sure that the City of El Cerrito and the West Contra Costa Joint Facility Use Agreement has technically been signed and delivered to us yet. No. So there were some issues with the custodian and some of their local one union and some issues, but I guess it hasn't been signed yet. So I'm sorry that our West County, a board member has already left to not hear that. Maybe we ought to have these at the beginning of the meeting. Additionally, JPA met on June 19th, and I had presented to you that there were some issues with the turf, the artificial turf that's down at the Gilman Fields, and they have had the company that makes the turf come out and see if we can get some of that repair work done under warranty, which they think can happen, so that's good. And they also did a survey of all of the fields in neighboring cities and what they charge hourly, because as you know, we're going to need to come up with a bunch more money in probably around 2015-16 to replace some of those fields even under warranty. It does have a lifetime. And they did a really nice complete survey about what adults are being charged and what youth are being charged for grass versus synthetic. In different cities like Albany, they surveyed Berkeley, Emeryville, El Cerrito, Richmond, Walnut Creek, San Francisco, and Albany. So of those fields that aren't at Gilman. And this was partially done because they're anticipating a fee increase to the users. And there was a lot of discussion about that because there's a lot of people who probably can't afford to have much higher fees than they're currently paying, but it may be a necessity. So they're doing a pretty complete study. They're going to talk to some user groups and see if we can build consensus with them to go forward and have a fee increase in the users. Design Review Board did not meet.
Okay, other?
I'm happy to go. I went to the Planning Commission meeting in June, and you may or may not know that they took up the AT&T wireless, they're called DAS boxes, and these are, I believe it's 6 proposed facilities, and the facilities are 7 to 11 feet tall, and they are proposed to be placed on existing utility poles, some along Seaview on the 800 block, and then a block or so up and a block or so below. So during that meeting, there were maybe 15 residents from that area coming to ask a lot of questions and speak out against those projects. We had 2 AT&T representatives, as well as an independent electrical engineer consultant that they hire to come in and do independent analyses having to do with what the electromagnetic field is that comes off of these types of wires and whether or not they conform with the federal government's guidelines for those. So it was quite a long and contentious meeting. Eventually the Planning Commission did vote unanimously, I believe. I'll have to make sure of that at our next meeting, but unanimously to approve. I'm sorry, that's not right. There was at least one dissenting vote. So they did vote to approve and move it forward, and then subsequently to that, I understand an appeal was filed, so we will be hearing more on those items. And FAB met a couple days ago while I was on vacation, but I got the update from Lisa, and they reviewed our investment report as well as our accounting and control policies, and they're still in the future planning to take up a bit more research on the reserve policy.
I had carefully prepared some reports, and I managed to, when I got here, I dumped them all in a stack, and I'm having a little trouble finding them. So I'll do this as best I can and as quickly as I can. First of all, I wanted to mention that I went to the mayor's conference, as did a number of other council members here, and we heard a presentation from Grace Coonigan, who's the new general manager of the BART system, and she gave, I thought, a real interesting presentation on the work that needs to be done at BART to maintain the existing infrastructure. You know, that means the cars, the track, you know, and everything, just to keep what we've already got held together, basically. And she talked about the work they're doing. They will be replacing, for example, I think all of the upholstery within a very short period of time. And if you haven't seen it, they're going to, I would call it vinyl or plastic. I'm not sure what the material is, but it's not cloth. And for which a number of people are very grateful, I get from what I hear. And they will also be allowing more room around the entrances to the cars for bicycles and for standees, so that when they have a lot of packed trains, which is already happening, they'll have more capacity to handle that. And I also, let's see, what do I want to mention? The West Contra Costa Transportation Advisory Committee passed the budget, but they did reduce dues because of an excess of funds in their account. But that's a one-time reduction and won't happen again next year the way it looks now anyway. And I think those are the main things that I can remember, having tossed my notes aside, so to speak, which is due to my hand. Anyway, so with that, that's it on the reports then. So we will adjourn this concurrent meeting of the City Council, Public Financing Authority, and Pension Trust Board, and our next City Council meeting will be held on Tuesday, August the 20th at 7 p.m. here in the council chambers. And thank you all for coming.